Mr. Jasper was lucky. The ambulance arrived quite quickly. One of the kind-hearted passers-by noticed the old man, who suddenly felt ill in the park, and immediately called the brigade. They took him to the nearest hospital and found him to be in a pre-infarction state. Although he was quickly brought to his senses, the doctors insisted on hospitalization for further observation and prevention of a second attack. Mr. Jasper flatly refused to be admitted. Frankly speaking, he had forgotten the last time he had been treated in a public hospital. He had his own trusted doctor from a private, very expensive clinic, who had been treating and monitoring him for many years. It was to him that the old man intended to turn to so that he could finally put him back on his feet. This time, however, his doctor was in agreement with his colleagues at the district hospital. "There's a high risk of another heart attack," he said. "You've really got yourself in a pickle, Mr. Jasper. You should be resting, you should be resting. You're always stressed, always thinking about work." Actually, Mr. Jasper had long been a pensioner by age, but he never gave up his job. It's a joke to be the owner of a huge company, which brought in about $500 million a year. And even though his assistants and managers were able to handle things quite well, still Mr. Jasper preferred to personally control the process and keep his hand on the pulse. There was another reason why the old man was so eager to work. The fact is that apart from work, he had nothing else in his life. Mr. Jasper had no family left in the whole world, no wife, no children, no grandchildren. He was terribly lonely. No, of course, there were colleagues, old mates, business partners, but all this was not the same. The old man had no one to come home in the evenings to his posh mansion in the suburbs. And once upon a time, things were different. Mr. Jasper slammed the bitter lump in his throat, remembering the times when there had been cheerful voices and children's laughter at home. He had destroyed all that with his own hands. And there was no one to blame for his loneliness but himself. He had once had a wife, Vanessa. Vanessa, the light of his eyes, the joy of his heart. He fell in love with her at first sight. As soon as he saw that long braid thrown over her shoulder, and cornflower, trusting eyes, deep as lakes, he courted her long and hard, beautifully. No millionaire then, just Mr. Jasper, an engineer in a factory. The most he had enough money for was to take Vanessa to an ice cream parlor, where delicious balls sprinkled with chocolate chips or hard nuts were served in tall cremains. Mr. Jasper had to walk halfway across the city to get home, because he couldn't even afford the underground. They married after Vanessa graduated from the institute and became a school teacher. The children adored her, surrounded her after school, and did not want to let her go. Looking at her, Mr. Jasper smiled contentedly, thinking that he and Vanessa would have children of their own someday, and she would be the most tender, attentive, and loving mother in the world. They dreamed of a large, close-knit family, 2 or 3 children at least. But their plans were not destined to come true. A few years after the wedding, without waiting for the desired pregnancy, Vanessa went to the doctors, and they gave her a disappointing diagnosis. Even if it is possible to conceive a child, to bear and give birth to it will be very difficult, at the cost of their own health, or even life. Vanessa hid this from her husband and decided not to tell him, because she was so eager to have a child, even if it threatened her with the most serious danger. And Mr. Jasper noticed that his sweet Vanessa's eyes were crying, that she had lost weight and had withdrawn into herself because of some of her secret worries. But he did not inquire. "It's okay," his wife told him, and he believed it. It was more comfortable for him to believe. He should have made her talk. If he'd known what she was up to, he would never have let her get pregnant, by God. I wish they'd taken the baby out of the orphanage. Vanessa would be alive now. A few months later, the long-awaited pregnancy finally arrived. Mr. Jasper was flying on wings. He was ready to carry his wife in his arms and paid no attention to the anxiety that lurked in the depths of her cornflower eyes. How would he chastise himself later for his inattention? Vanessa had died in childbirth. Stunned, literally crushed by grief, her husband was left with a tiny female infant in his arms and had no idea what to do now, how to live. Fortunately, the world was not without good people. Comrades from the factory, neighbors, and especially kind-hearted neighbors helped him. The poor widower was fed by the whole house, who brought him borscht in pots, who brought him a piece of pie, who brought him a few cutlets. The old ladies in his neighborhood willingly took turns babysitting tiny Amanda. That's what Mr. Jasper called his daughter, Amanda, or more affectionately, Mandy. The grandmothers cooked her porridge, or rice porridge, wheeled her around the yard in a pram, sang her songs, played fiddles. Amanda laughed merrily, blowing bubbles with her toothless mouth. Then she was put into the nursery, and Mr. Jasper felt a little better. Though generally speaking, Amanda was a clever and golden child, giving her father almost no trouble at all. But looking into her clear blue beady eyes, so similar to her late mother's bottomless eyes, Mr. Jasper felt tears welling up in his eyes. He longed desperately for his Vanessa. How he missed her. When Amanda went to school, the teachers had praised her. She was a quick learner. But the best thing she did was dancing, or rather classical choreography. From the age of 5, Amanda attended a ballet class at the Arts Center and showed great promise. Her teacher, a former ballerina at the Metropolitan Opera, called Mr. Jasper in one day and spoke at length about how amazingly talented his daughter was, and how it would be a crime if he didn't let her talent develop. Mr. Jasper listened, nodding absent-mindedly, but frankly speaking, did not take her words seriously. What kind of profession is a ballerina? It's ridiculous. You need something more grounded, more earthly. All the more so when times were troubled. A huge country collapsed, and it became quite obvious that you need to spin as hard as you can to somehow survive in this chaos. What ballet, for God's sake? Who needs it now? Amanda dreamed of going to a dance academy, but her father wouldn't let her. You need to get some promising profession, with which you will always have a piece of bread, not only with butter, but also with caviar, he urged his daughter. How about an economist? Amanda shook her head stubbornly. Her eyes filled with tears and became very big. Daddy, I don't want to be an economist. I'm not interested, and I don't understand it at all. Don't you see, you silly girl? Mr. Jasper was angry with her. Nowadays, it's all about perspective, not interest. At that time, he was busy starting his own firm, and therefore prospects, profit, and gain interested him more than anything else. In his pursuit of financial success, he missed his daughter. No, formally Amanda accepted, put away her ballet tutu and point shoes, began to attend a tutor in mathematics, preparing for admission to an economic university. But only from her eyes forever lost a lively light. She just obediently obeyed the will of his father, but as if completely lost the taste for life. What kind of a fool was he? How could he be so selfish? If it wasn't for his stubbornness and fixation on his own business, Amanda would still be alive. She didn't snap out of it right away. She obediently finished 11th grade with honors, entered one of the best economic universities in the capital on a budget. She began to study, passed her first sessions, received an increased scholarship, moved from course to course, and one day suddenly did not come home at night. Mr. Jasper almost went mad with worry. In 20 years of her life, this was the first time this had ever happened to her. Usually she always gave notice if she was late at a friend's house, but she always slept at home. He didn't know what to think. He rang all the numbers in her address book, but never found out where his daughter was. In the morning, stupefied with sleep and excitement, he was about to run to the police. When the doorbell rang, Mr. Jasper rushed to open the door and almost gasped in shock when he saw his daughter, his beloved, long-awaited Amanda. But what was her appearance? What horrifying condition? Tangled hair, a dirty face, hands and feet, as if she had been rolled in mud, a torn skirt, and the smell of cigarettes mixed with alcohol. This from her, the one who never even drank champagne on New Year's Eve. "Daughter, what happened to you?" he asked in a trembling voice. She suddenly looked at him angrily, almost in rage, with an evil, completely alien look, as if a stranger, and whispered, "I hate you, I hate you. You've ruined my whole life." And then she sobbed bitterly and inconsolably. Mr. Jasper froze as if he had been slapped. He had never realized that his daughter's grief over her failed career as a ballerina was so great. He had thought she had long since forgotten her childhood dream. But it turns out she hadn't. She hadn't forgotten. She hadn't forgotten, and she hadn't forgiven. The next day, Amanda behaved as usual with her father. She was reserved, even dry, but without the hostility of yesterday, and never said a word about the angry accusations she had hurled in his face yesterday. Mr. Jasper imperceptibly took a breath, hoping that his daughter had simply had enough and had calmed down. A month later, it was revealed that Amanda was pregnant. She never told him who the father was. He never asked. And did she even know it herself? Mr. Jasper recalled the state she'd been in when she'd come home ragged, dirty, drunk. "Lord, my child, what have you done?" He sighed brokenly, furtively wiping away a stingy male tear. Amanda was indifferent to her situation. Mr. Jasper was a man and did not know how to support her or what words to find. The only thing he could do for her was to find the best doctor in New York to manage her pregnancy. Did Amanda appreciate his concern? I don't think so. She just dutifully and indifferently visited the gynecologist for routine checkups, without showing the slightest interest in the tiny human being that was developing and growing in her belly. She finished university. Mr. Jasper's connections had helped. But of course there was no question of a first-class honors degree. Her daughter had lost all interest in her studies. And did she have any at all? The only thing that caused Amanda any glimmer of interest was ballet, when she accidentally stumbled upon ballerinas on TV. She would literally freeze in front of the screen, as if hypnotized, watching thin, delicate dancers in snow-white tutus flutter across the stage like angels. She unconsciously wiped tears from her cheeks and then squinted hatefully at her bulging belly. A few months later, Amanda safely gave birth to a child, and 3 days later, shortly before discharge, threw herself out of the window of her hospital room. The experts later said it was a classic case of postnatal depression. But Mr. Jasper knew that his girl's depression had started much earlier, and he had no one to blame but himself. He had clipped his daughter's wings with his own hands, robbed her of her dreams and a happy future. He was deaf and blind because he didn't want to consider her wishes. When the tiny bundle was placed in his arms, he experienced what is commonly known as déjà vu. Only now he was cradling not his daughter, but his granddaughter Linda. But again, as 20 years ago, he was alone with the child. Now, afraid of making the same mistakes he had made with Amanda, Mr. Jasper allowed the little girl absolutely everything. He spoiled his granddaughter without looking back, fearing that Linda would repeat Amanda's fate. But his family seemed to be under some evil spell. The spoilt and capricious girl at school was eating up miles of his nerves, forcing him to take Valacordine. All she knew to do was stomp her feet and say, "I do." And he, afraid to break Linda's life with his refusals and restrictions, allowed her absolutely everything: the best toys, the best outfits, the best school in town, a prestigious elite gymnasium, to which Linda was taken by a private driver, the best gadgets. Mr. Jasper couldn't say no to any of her requests. To be more precise, his granddaughter didn't ask, she demanded. He realized later that he'd ruined her with that permissiveness. At school, his granddaughter learned poorly, crawling from class to class. Only thanks to the authority and money of her grandfather, Mr. Jasper, who was the main sponsor of the gymnasium, teachers gave her a C, closing their eyes and stepping on the throat of their principals. And in high school, they even pulled the girl out for 4s. And the certificate proudly stood solid 4s. After graduating from the 11th grade, Linda said that she was not going to go anywhere. "I am too young and too much in love with life to waste my best years on boring studies," she said. "But Linda, how can you be without education, without a profession?" questioned her grandfather in shock. "Just tell me, will I put you in any institute you want?" "I won't go to any," cut Linda off. "I'm young, Grandpa. You know, young and beautiful. I want to go out to breathe. You wouldn't understand, because you've had your time." He tried to argue, persuade, and beg, but it was useless. His granddaughter didn't even pretend that she was going to listen to his lectures and entreaties. She rolled her eyes expressively, letting him know how tired she was of his lectures. And then, what happened next was predictable: drinking, partying, dubious new friends and mates, casual liaisons. Linda got involved with bad people, got into bad company, got hooked on drugs. During that period, she was no longer like herself. She dragged valuable things out of the house to sell them and earn herself another dose. There was nothing human left in her. One day, Mr. Jasper tried to stop her. He begged her to come to her senses, to go to a clinic for treatment, to get rid of this damned addiction. But Linda, who was breaking down waiting for her dose, glared and swung a kitchen knife at her grandfather. "I'll kill you if you don't let me pass," she threatened. It was clear from her tone that she was not joking or intimidating, but really capable of murder. Mr. Jasper stepped back, obediently letting her go. When he heard the sound of the door slamming shut, he simply collapsed, sat on the floor and sobbed, realizing that he had lost his granddaughter forever. All addicts tend to end up the same way. Eventually, trouble came to their home. Linda died of an overdose. Mr. Jasper didn't remember how he survived. How could a man endure so much? He had lost his 3 favorite girls one after another, first his wife, then his daughter, and now his granddaughter. Why should he live? For what? For what? Then it was his job that saved him. Mr. Jasper worked like a man possessed, afraid to stop for even a moment. He worked himself to the point of exhaustion, so he wouldn't have time to dwell on his misfortune. His firm was growing, expanding, getting branches all over the country. There were multi-million-dollar contracts, partners around the world, trips abroad, expensive cars, a new luxurious house, respect and authority in business circles. But there was no joy, no personal happiness. Mr. Jasper was 70 years old and terribly lonely. And it wasn't the proverbial glass of water that no one would give him in his old age. The old man wasn't worried about that. His money would have been enough for a nurse who would have brought him water, champagne, Dutch cigars, and caviar sandwiches 24 hours a day, 7 days a week without a break. But that wasn't the point. There was simply no one around whom he loved with all his heart, and who would love him as much. Of course, even now, when he was old and his hair was silver, he was hunted by young, bold, showy, beautiful, long-legged girls who called him darling and kitty, swore eternal love and ineptly feigned mad passion. And Mr. Jasper was well aware that they were simply after his wealth. Probably every one of them would have agreed to marry him. So what if he was old, but he was a millionaire? But he couldn't even dream of taking one of those cloned Barbie dolls as his lawfully wedded wife. Not even a commonplace mistress. Although among the people of his circle it was considered prestigious and fashionable to go out with some young beautiful model when he had an official spouse. Mr. Jasper had no need of that. Different temperaments, different generations, different upbringings. They had nothing to talk to each other about. He was getting bored. 5 minutes into the conversation, these girls did not understand his jokes, did not watch the old films that he was so fond of quoting. Once, deciding to compliment one of them, he remembered the words from the film. "Oh boy, Arenya, beauty is Lipa, black in the lips, united in the eyebrows." The maiden, in reply to this phrase, perplexed, flapped her false eyelashes and babbled perplexedly. "What language is that, Belarusian?" It was at that moment that Mr. Jasper finally realized that they were like beings from different planets to each other. God forbid such a companion. He would rather be alone than with anyone else. His main assistants in the company were 2 bright lads, Brian and Norman. He'd hired them as young boys, fresh out of college. Now they were both experienced businessmen, real professionals. In the absence of heirs, Mr. Jasper even thought of bequeathing his company to these 2. Let them run it as a pair, on an equal footing. He couldn't make a choice in favor of one or the other. Both Brian and Norman were worthy of the position. Besides, they treated Mr. Jasper not only as their boss, but practically as their father. He was their unquestioned authority, and they literally looked him in the mouth, catching every word. When they learnt that their boss had nearly been hospitalized, the 2 rushed to his house the same evening and began to reprimand him for not taking care of his health at all. "What do you want, Mr. Jasper?" Norman was adamant. "You're not going to be doing any work for the next week. We won't let you on the doorstep." "I agree," said Brian. "And we'll tell security not to let you in either." "Talking in the ranks," grumbled the old man jokingly. "Still, touched by such attention to their own person as this, my guards won't let me into my own work." "Because your guards want a living boss, not a dead one," Norman objected reasonably. "But really, Mr. Jasper, you've got yourself in a bind. Nowhere. Your precious firm won't go away or go bankrupt without you. Brian and I will see to that." "I believe you, boys," Mr. Jasper nodded. "I believe you. The company's safe with you. But I don't know how to rest," he added, and then he waved his hands helplessly. "Once you've learnt it, you'll learn it again," Norman said sternly. "Walks in the fresh air, adequate sleep, vitamins. It's about time you got yourself some exercise." "I think I'll go to a notary and make a will in favor of the boys," Mr. Jasper thought for the umpteenth time, "because I keep going and going, and then it may be too late. And my boys will be left with nothing." It's said and done. Since Norman and Brian had given him an almost ultimatum not to come to the company's head office, he began to sort out the things he'd never got round to doing. Firstly, he visited a notary and made a will in favor of his assistants Norman and Brian. Secondly, he took long walks in the morning and evening. Mr. Jasper now spent a lot of time outdoors in parks and squares, by the pond, feeding the ducks in the shade of trees, and felt his restless soul soothed by such a measured existence. Thirdly, on the advice of a nutritionist, Mr. Jasper began to eat a balanced diet, avoiding fatty, fried, too salty or spicy foods. Fourthly, he began to read and watch films, trying his best to distract himself from other people's fates and other people's problems. Fifthly, he began to go to bed on time and had a good night's sleep, from which he instantly felt a surge of strength and energy. Such a small holiday was really necessary for me for a long time, the old man had to admit. I was running at breakneck speed, non-stop, not giving myself a break. But however wonderful his present pastime was, Mr. Jasper eventually grew bored. He was drawn back to work, to cases, papers, contracts, and deals. All right, he said to himself, just a couple more days, and that's it, 100 years rest. He walked slowly along the boulevard, breathing in the fragrance of the flowers growing in the flower beds. But his thoughts were already far away, in his office. Suddenly his attention was drawn to a group of people from the crowd at the crossroads. They seemed to be watching someone, either dancers or musicians. No wonder the city was full of street performers during the warm season. There was music coming from a speaker. Some unknown foreign singer was singing in a hoarse voice something about love, loneliness, and longing. Mr. Jasper saw through the backs of the people that there was someone dancing in the center of the circle. There was a flicker of long golden red curls, the same curls his granddaughter Linda had. Linda. The old man thought sadly. On a sudden impulse, he took a step forward, approaching the improvised concert stage, and stretched his neck, trying to see the face of the dancer. "What a girl is burning," said with admiration one of the gawkers right above his ear. "Fire." Mr. Jasper was even more curious. "Allow me," he muttered, trying to elbow his way through the crowd and squeeze into the circle. "Grandpa, where are you going?" Someone loudly indignant. "This is no place for old people." But Mr. Jasper was already in front, staring at the dancing figure. His heart jumped. Even her physique was the same as the late Linda's. The same thin, frail, flexible girl was doing some unthinkable pirouettes, spinning on her own axis, jumping, doing a twine in the air with a somersault over her head. It didn't look much like classical choreography. It looked like street dancers just improvised. But it was impossible to take one's eyes off her. Her movements were smooth, then sharp, then delicate, then provocative, almost provocative. And then, making another leap and landing on one bended knee, the dancer shook her red curls, throwing them behind her back. And Mr. Jasper was finally able to see her face. He saw it and was numb. He was literally frozen with shock, for it was Linda herself in front of him. I think he started to get short of breath. I think he woke up and wheezed, and someone immediately took him under the arm and carefully led him to the nearest bench. "Hey, the old man's not well," someone shouted loudly. But he was still turning round from the last vestiges of his strength, craning his neck in the direction where he had seen the ghost of his dead granddaughter. That it was a ghost, Mr. Jasper had no doubt. There is no such thing as people so alike in the world, unless of course they are twins. Stop, twins. Mr. Jasper clutched at this saving thought like a drowning man clutching at straws. Could it be that his unfortunate granddaughter and this dancer were really related by blood? Yes, it sounded like nonsense. Especially since Amanda only had one child. At least that's what he'd been told. But there must be some logical, scientific explanation for such a striking resemblance. Or maybe it's just a play of his fevered imagination. Suddenly, in fear, he thought, what if these street dancers are nothing like his granddaughter? I don't know what he imagined from excitement. And he did get excited. He saw a familiar type, the same figure, the same hair. So he drew a mental picture of the resemblance, which was not really there. He had to look at the girl again to be sure she was nothing like Linda. Meanwhile, he was carefully seated on a bench. The tight collar of his shirt was loosened, and a bottle of mineral water was held out to him. Mr. Jasper obediently took a few sips, tried to catch his breath, but never for a moment forgot about the dancer. "Where is she?" "I don't think she's run away," he muttered. "Well, you, grandfather, found the time and place to die," said with annoyance some tall, lanky guy. "You frightened the whole audience." "Thank you, scare away the audience?" "I don't understand?" Mr. Jasper asked. The lad shook his head irritably. "What do you say?" "No. Came in the middle of a performance, disrupted the dance. Nearly fell off himself." "Come on, Travis." Mr. Jasper heard a voice that gave him goosebumps. He couldn't believe it, but it was the voice of his granddaughter, Linda. And now it was her own voice telling Travis not to be angry with Mr. Jasper. "Don't you see, the man is sick. He didn't do it on purpose." The girl said these words conciliatingly. Mr. Jasper raised his head and fixed his eager gaze on her face. There could be no mistake. Linda, that was all. And not believing his own eyes. Linda. What if he went crazy from loneliness and started seeing hallucinations? Maybe Linda isn't even here, he thought. But she was there, standing right in front of him, and looking into his worried face, she asked with obvious concern. "Are you talking to me? Why do you call me Linda?" Mr. Jasper said in a hoarse, excited voice. "Linda. Don't you recognize me?" Mr. Jasper asked. The girl opened her mouth in amazement. "Do I know you? I think you have me confused with someone else. My name isn't Linda." It's like he's been splashed with cold water. Is he faking it, lying, or telling the truth? "What's your name?" he said. "Jennifer," she said. "No way." Mr. Jasper exhaled helplessly. "Yes, Jennifer, it's Jennifer," confirmed the guy who had complained that Mr. Jasper was scaring away the audience. "Everybody knows her around here. You've got her confused with someone else, Dad." Mr. Jasper didn't even take offense at the familiarity, at being poked. He was more concerned with another question than anything else in the world. "Who are your parents? What are their names?" he asked uncertainly. The girl immediately became sad. "They died 3 years ago, killed in a car accident. Mom's name was Natalie and Dad's name was Addison. Why do you ask? Were you familiar with them?" Mr. Jasper took a disappointed breath. Had he made a mistake? Was this remarkable resemblance only a mockery of nature? "How old are you, Jennifer?" he finally asked, just to say something. She looked at him apprehensively. "What kind of interrogation is this?" she said. But after a pause, she answered. "She'll be 21 in September." Mr. Jasper felt his breath catch again. After all, it was in September that his granddaughter Linda could also turn 21. "The 5th of September?" he asked quickly and excitedly. Jennifer, or whoever she was confusedly silent. "Yes," she whispered hesitantly. "How do you know? Do we really know each other? Only I don't remember you at all." Mr. Jasper took a breath. "There's no such thing as coincidence. It just doesn't happen, that's all." Jennifer," he corrected himself. "Didn't you have a sister?" The girl looked at him warily. "Wait a minute," she said incredulously. "Do you know anything about my real family?" Mr. Jasper's heart nearly stopped at these words. "The real one," Jennifer replied, biting her lower lip nervously, then sighed. "But it's a long story." "I'm in no hurry," Mr. Jasper said quickly. "I'm ready to listen as long as you like." But the disgruntled fellow intervened. "Stop talking, Jenny. Money doesn't make itself." "Travis, wait," she pleaded. "I think I found someone who knows something about me. Something I don't know." The guy made a bored face. "What do I care about that? I don't give a shit what you know or what you don't know. The main thing is that you have to work today as you should. After all, you live with me, eat my bread." The girl's face blushed red with shame. "I'm sorry," she muttered, turning to Mr. Jasper. "I really have to work." But he couldn't just let her go. He had no right. Young man, Mr. Jasper turned to Travis. How much money is Linda supposed to make today? Jennifer, I mean? How much? He smirked. The more the better. There's no such thing as too much money. I usually make between 1,000 and 10,000 a day. That's on the best days, Jennifer added hastily. But sometimes it's less. Sometimes I don't make anything all day. People come up, watch me dance, clap, take videos, but they don't pay me any money. We call them freeloaders. Travis spat contemptuously on the ground. But tell you what, Mr. Jasper said firmly. Give me your phone number. I'll drop it on your card right now. Why would I do that? Travis was indignant. I'm the boss. She gives the money to me, and then I give her her share. That's a hell of a system you've got here. Mr. Jasper shook his head. You don't dance, and you take the girl's earnings for yourself. I give her a roof over her head and a piece of bread, said the boy indignantly. What would she do without me? Where would she go? She'd be wandering in the rubbish heap. A benefactor, said Mr. Jasper, grinning. All right, give me your number, and I'll pay for Jennifer for the time being. For that, you'll let me and her have a quiet, unhurried talk. It won't be cheap, Travis grumbled greedily. 50,000, Mr. Jasper said calmly. Both Jennifer and Travis were momentarily speechless. 50,000? Travis asked, stunned. Are you serious now? I'm dead serious, Mr. Jasper nodded. Jennifer was suddenly frightened. What could she expect from this strange old man who spoke in riddles, called her Linda, and was willing to pay $50,000 for her? If you think I'm providing intimate services, she said with a hitch. She said with a hitch, then you're wrong. And nothing of the sort is going to happen. Do you understand what I mean? No private dances or anything like that. Mr. Jasper stared at her in genuine amazement. What he said in shock. What intimate favors, what private dances? I just want to talk. Girl, I guarantee you complete and absolute safety. With these words, he turned to Travis and added, I promise you. However, it was written all over Travis' face that for that kind of money he wouldn't hesitate to send Jennifer to bed even with this old man. Mr. Jasper shook his head disapprovingly, but said nothing aloud. Instead, he turned round and addressed the girl. Let's go and get something to eat somewhere. There are lots of different cafes around here. Jennifer swallowed hungry saliva so loudly that it was clear the girl was terribly hungry. Killing that Travis isn't enough, Mr. Jasper raged to himself. He's got the girl down, and she hasn't had a crumb in her mouth for God knows how long. How long are you taking her away for? Travis asked after her. Mr. Jasper turned his head slightly in his direction and said, I've paid for her working day in full, so she's free until tonight and doesn't have to come back. Or do you have any objections? Travis immediately got cold feet about losing the money he had received and instantly backtracked. Nothing. It's all paid for, said Travis. So take her for as long as you like. Mr. Jasper took the girl under his arm gently, fearing to frighten her. He was just afraid that she would get scared at the last moment and run away from him, disappear, and he had no right to lose her. What kind of cuisine do you prefer? He asked with a carefree look. Spanish, Italian, Asian? Jennifer smiled shyly. Anything. As long as it's not too expensive. And the portions aren't too small, she joked. I just don't have a lot of money on me. Don't worry about money, Mr. Jasper said. I invited you, so I'll pay for dinner. Are you a rich millionaire? Jennifer asked curiously. Do you throw money around so easily? Here Mr. Jasper only hummed, but left the question unanswered. Poor girl, he thought. What has she seen in her life if to her a simple trip to a cafe means throwing money? In the end, they chose a small, cozy summer cafe with a youthful menu. Jennifer was embarrassed at first, but then ordered a pizza and nuggets and a milkshake to go with it. Mr. Jasper limited himself to green tea, as he wasn't hungry at all. While the poor girl ate, he didn't pester her with questions. He drank his tea in silence, avoiding a close look at the girl, but nevertheless he noted characteristic details. Thin arms, protruding collarbones, vertebrae on her back that could be counted. The girl had obviously been starving for a long time. Killing that Travis isn't enough, Mr. Jasper thought again with anger. Boasts of having provided Jennifer with a roof over her head and a piece of bread. I don't see the poor girl eating enough. She's a dancer. She needs strength, a lot of strength and energy. It was evident that Jennifer was trying hard to restrain herself from eating too greedily. But at the same time, she was eating in a way that was painful to watch. She was licking her fingers, shoveling nuggets and pizza into her mouth. At last she was full and belatedly realized that she must have been acting like a real glutton. An embarrassed blush spread across her cheeks. "I'm sorry," she mumbled faintly. "For what?" Mr. Jasper was genuinely surprised. "I'm glad you have a good appetite. After all, you needed to eat." Jennifer wiped her fingers and mouth thoroughly with a napkin. Already more relaxed, she sipped her cocktail through a straw. "Well, you can ask your questions," she finally said. "I can see you're eager." Mr. Jasper hesitated, not knowing where to begin. The subject was too sensitive. Noticing his predicament, Jennifer came to his rescue. "Why did you call me Linda?" she asked. Instead of answering, Mr. Jasper reached into his jacket pocket for his wallet. Opening it, he showed Jennifer a color photograph of the late Linda, which he kept old-fashioned under the clear plastic. For some reason, he didn't like to keep the photo on his phone, and he hardly ever took pictures with it. Jennifer leaned over to get a better look at the photo and immediately recoiled in involuntary horror. "What is that? Who is it? Is that me, or is that not me? I don't remember being photographed like that, and I don't have a dress like that." Mr. Jasper smiled sadly and shook his head. "That's not you. That is my granddaughter, Linda. She too was born on the 5th of September, and she would be the same age as you are now." The attentive Jennifer immediately seized on that phrase. "Would have been. You mean to say that?" The old man nodded. "Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying. Linda's dead. That's why I was so shocked when I saw you. You know, the resemblance is uncanny." Jennifer sighed softly. "My mom used to tell me I had a sister. All my childhood I dreamed of finding her. I believed that someday my sister and I would meet. But unfortunately, Mom didn't know anything about where to find her." Mr. Jasper took a deep breath. "Tell me about your foster parents," Mr. Jasper asked. "So they didn't hide the fact that you weren't related from you?" Jennifer shook her head. "Told the truth. Why, when I was 14 years old. But that doesn't change anything. I still love them. Until the very last day," she added bitterly. "Do you know how you came to be in this family?" Mr. Jasper asked excitedly. The girl shrugged her thin shoulders. "Only in the most general terms. My mom worked as a midwife in a maternity hospital. She and my dad didn't have children of their own, though they wanted to. Then one day a girl was brought to the maternity hospital, very young and lost. Indifferent, as if she didn't care what would happen to her and her pregnancy. That was my real mom." Amanda, Mr. Jasper finished quietly, and as Jennifer stared at him in bewilderment, he explained her name was Amanda. "Maybe Mom didn't tell me," that Jennifer nodded. "So what happened next?" "Next, this girl had a difficult labor. She lost a lot of blood, and twins were born, me and my sister Linda. And if Linda was more or less all right, then me. I was very sick and weak. The doctors were afraid to even give me a prognosis. They expected me to die, but the girl didn't seem to care. She didn't seem to care whether her daughters lived or died. And then my mom, Natalie's mom Jennifer explained, begged her to give up her sick child. She said she fell in love with me at first sight. I was so small and helpless, and nobody wanted me. Anyway, she convinced my real mom to sign the papers." "And Amanda did," Mr. Jasper finished in a low voice. "Without saying a word to me. Did she have any idea what she was doing? She was completely out of her mind. And then?" Then Jennifer said quietly, "Then, just before she was discharged, she threw herself out of a window and died." Jennifer said very quietly, "And my sister Linda was left without a mother. She was raised by me," Mr. Jasper nodded bitterly. But unfortunately, I didn't keep her safe, just like I couldn't keep Amanda and Vanessa safe. "Who's Vanessa?" Jennifer asked, puzzled. "That's my wife, your grandmother. She died a long time ago too, 40 years ago. Her heart was weak, and we have no more children or grandchildren." "I see," Jennifer clarified. Mr. Jasper shook his head sadly. "Not a living soul. Well, except for you. God, I still can't believe you're really my granddaughter." He covered his eyes for a moment. "I can't believe it either," she admitted. "Ever since I found out the truth, I've always wanted to find one of my blood relatives, to meet them, to talk to them." "Your foster parents, did they ever hurt you?" he asked cautiously. Jennifer shook her head. "No, on the contrary, they didn't hurt me. They adored me. They adored me. They put all their unspent parental love in me, and I loved them very much too. That accident just wiped out my whole happy life, and all hell broke loose." She covered her face with her hands. Mr. Jasper gently stroked her skinny shoulder. "How come you had nowhere to live after Mom and Dad died? And suddenly some distant relatives from Wyoming showed up? I never really knew if they were on my mom's side or my dad's side. They immediately began to intimidate me, threaten me, and finally almost forced me to go to a notary and get a deed of gift for Mom and Dad's flat. I was the only heir. And these scoundrels dared to rob an orphan." Mr. Jasper was outraged. "Yes, you should have reported them to the police," Jennifer said quietly. "I was just so frightened. I was all alone and confused and didn't know what to do. I probably would have died. I probably wouldn't have survived on the streets if it wasn't for Travis. He helps people like me," Jennifer continued. "Gives us a roof over our heads, and then he makes us work for him. He may seem callous to you, but he's been my only salvation." "Well, you're not going back to that savior, Travis," Mr. Jasper said firmly. "I'll see to that. After all, I am your own grandfather, and I have no problem with your living arrangements." Jennifer stared at him. "Do you want me to live in your house?" "Why not? It's not like we're strangers. I've got plenty of room." "So you're going to officially recognize me as your granddaughter? To conduct a genetic test to prove the kinship?" "God be with you, girl." Mr. Jasper waved his hands at her. "What kind of expertise? Why do we have to be so formal? I know you're my kin without any expertise. You're my soulmate. You and Linda are the same face, the same voice. I still get goosebumps when I look at you." Jennifer averted her eyes and nervously hooked her fingers in a lock. "Yes, but we're only related in fact, but in fact we're complete strangers to each other. I don't know you at all. You don't know me either. Wouldn't you be afraid to bring someone you don't know into your house? What if I kill you or rob you?" Mr. Jasper couldn't bear it and laughed, throwing his head back. "Who, you? You're a burglar. It's written on your forehead, child, that you wouldn't hurt a fly. Yes, I don't know you as well as a grandfather should know his granddaughter, but I know in my heart that you're a good man. And the fact that we don't know each other, that's not a problem. We'll gradually get to know each other while we have time," he added, thinking. "I'm not forever, unfortunately." Mr. Jasper is already at a young age. Jennifer's face changed. On impulse, she leaned forward and grabbed the old man's hand, squeezing it in her warm palms. "Don't say that," she exclaimed almost in terror. "Please don't. I have only just found my only kinsman, my grandfather, and I haven't even had time to get used to the thought. Don't talk and think bad thoughts. Okay?" "All right," Mr. Jasper nodded, with a touch of sadness in his voice. "But then you and I really shouldn't waste any time. You're moving in with me now." Jennifer didn't object. Tall Travis was certainly confused when Jennifer announced to him that she was leaving. "Wow, that's some news," he muttered. "I can't say I'm happy about it. You're one of my best dancers. I'm going to miss you terribly." Mr. Jasper thought irritably to himself. "It's not Jennifer you'll miss. It's the money she brought you." He saw right through the sly man. But he decided not to provoke a conflict, giving everyone a chance to part peacefully. Jennifer had almost no belongings, nothing to pack but the papers Travis kept in his desk drawer. While she was putting her belongings into a small traveling bag, Travis stood nearby, watching her packing as if he was afraid Jennifer might grab something valuable that didn't belong to her. Jennifer didn't seem to notice his suspicious glances. She seemed genuinely grateful to the man, and even cried one last time when she hugged him goodbye. Finally, she and Mr. Jasper walked out of the driveway. Jennifer hesitantly stopped and looked at her grandfather. "How are we going to get there? By underground? Do you live far away?" "Yes, a bit far," Mr. Jasper grinned, referring to his country mansion. "I'm afraid the underground doesn't go there, Jennifer." With these words, he took out his mobile phone and dialed the number of his driver. "Shall we take a taxi?" Jennifer guessed. Immediately, Jennifer frowned worriedly. That must be very expensive. What was her surprise when a luxury black foreign car drove into the courtyard and pulled up neatly in front of the entrance. Jennifer was even more shocked when the driver got out of the car, and with a respectful nod to Mr. Jasper, and then to Jennifer, gallantly opened the passenger side doors. "Please," he said politely. "Is this your personal driver?" Jennifer asked in a whisper of amazement, dumbfounded. "That's great." But the biggest shock was ahead of her. When they passed the city center with its traffic jams, and then entered the elite suburban village, the amazed girl opened her mouth and did not close it until the car slowed down at the gate of a luxurious two-story mansion. Hidden in the dense greenery of trees and surrounded by a beautiful fence of metal, Jennifer looked like she was about to faint. As she climbed out of the car, she marveled at the views before her and then reached her verdict. This is not a house, it's a palace. Inside, however, the palace turned out to be a modern dwelling. Mr. Jasper asked the housekeeper to give the girl a little tour of the house. Jennifer, as fascinated, wandered through the rooms, looking at the paintings on the walls, photographs, exquisite expensive furniture, and other attributes of the life of millionaires, which before she had seen only in the cinema. "Mr. Jasper," the maid asked, "which room do you want to prepare for your guest?" The old man smiled. "This is not a guest. This is my own granddaughter, and she herself will choose the room she likes best." Of course. All the servants did not give away their shock with a look, word, or gesture. They were not paid to express surprise or disagreement. In the end, Jennifer opted for a small, cozy room with a private bathroom. She was captivated by the view it overlooked a garden with fresh, lush greenery and colorful flower buds. "It's marvelous here," she exhaled. "I don't even have words to describe everything I feel," Jennifer said. Mr. Jasper smiled. "This is the former room of Amanda, your mother." Oh, Jennifer fell respectfully silent, and then shifted her gaze to a framed photograph that hung above the bed. The picture showed a fragile, flexible girl in a snow-white tutu and pointe shoes standing on a ballet barre. With her chin proudly raised, she was performing some complicated piaz, standing on the toes of one foot, her other foot held high and backwards. Was she a ballerina? Jennifer asked in a reverent whisper. There was a lingering sadness in Mr. Jasper's eyes. Not professionally, no, though she had always dreamed of it. She'd done ballet for a few years, but after high school she'd chosen a different profession. But why not a choreographic institute or a ballet academy? Jennifer wondered, since, as you say, it was her dream. Grandfather sighed guiltily. It's a long story. Someday I will definitely tell it to you, but not now. Now you need to get some rest. You can take a shower, put your things away, and at 8 o'clock, please come down to the dining room for dinner. Do I have to dress up? Jennifer asked a little nervously. Actually, I don't have any holiday clothes with me. Mr. Jasper laughed good-naturedly. You're home, Jennifer, relax. This is an informal reception, not a visit from any important guests, but a dinner in a small family circle. It's just me and you, no one else. There's no dress code in this house. So you can go out in your pajamas. Jennifer took a breath and sighed with relief. However, there was no family dinner. As Jennifer, refreshed from her shower, easily ran down the stairs to the dining room, she heard men's voices. One of them was undoubtedly her grandfather's, but the other two were unfamiliar to her. Jennifer immediately tensed and slowed down, listening to see if it would be appropriate to barge into the dining room now. What if there was some important conversation going on in there that wasn't meant for her ears? But at the same instant, she thought she heard her name. It was clearly about her. Jennifer hesitated for a moment, but pushed open the door and entered. She was immediately stared at by 3 pairs of eyes, her grandfather's and 2 other strange men, or rather guys. And these guys were not only young, but also unusually good-looking, as if they were film actors or models from the cover of a glossy magazine. One was a brunette with piercing brown eyes from under dark eyebrows, the other a gray-eyed blonde with a kind smile. Jennifer froze confused, not knowing how to react to say hello or to wait for them to say hello first. Damn, she knew absolutely nothing about the rules of etiquette. Fortunately, Mr. Jasper came to her rescue. "Jennifer," he exclaimed excitedly and cheerfully. Come in, baby. Let me introduce you to my assistants. They have come to check on me and ask about my health. Each of them is my right-hand man at work. I don't know what I'd do without them." 2 right hands? Jennifer said with an innocent twinkle in her eye. Interesting, but unnatural. The blonde immediately laughed good-naturedly at her joke, but the brunette's eyes darkened and became almost black. He didn't seem to appreciate the humor. "This is Brian, grandfather," introduced the smiling blonde. He looked at Jennifer cheerfully and directly, and that pure, sincere look calmed her down a little. It seemed that no one was going to make fun of her for breaking the rules of etiquette and dress code. "And this is Norman," Mr. Jasper introduced the brunette. He smiled discreetly at her and even kissed her hand, which made her blush. But still, in spite of his outward affability, there was something cold and repulsive about Norman. Jennifer couldn't explain it in words, she just felt it. The dinner was rather hectic. Jennifer was occasionally embarrassed by her clumsiness and her inability to use all those knives and forks. She couldn't even taste the food and barely remembered what they ate. Brian told jokes and entertained everyone as best he could. Jennifer enjoyed laughing at his jokes. Norman, on the other hand, seemed to be watching her from the sidelines. She could feel his gaze on her cheek, crawling across her face like a pesky bug, and there was nothing kind about it. Brian noticed it too. As dinner came to an end and the boys said goodbye to the owner and his granddaughter, leaving the house, Brian asked his friend, "What fly bit you? What's your beef with the girl? I thought you were going to kill her with that look." Norman grinned unkindly. "Doesn't anything about this story bother you? It's a bit of a mess, mate." "What do you mean?" Brian didn't understand. An old man suddenly has a granddaughter who's come out of nowhere. She tells him a not-so-simple and hastily concocted story about twins. It's like an Indian film, he snorted contemptuously. "What are you implying?" Brian was wary. "That she's lying, of course," Norman explained. "Why would she lie?" The boy wondered. "It's written all over her face. You only have to look at her to realize that she looks exactly like the dead Linda." "Oh, please." Norman rolled his eyes ironically. With today's plastic surgery, there may have been a slight resemblance from nature, but with the help of specialists, she'd made it absolute. She'd deliberately caught Mr. Jasper's eye, played up a supposedly chance encounter, and he'd gone straight for it. He fell for it. You heard him yourself. He won't even have an examination. He's got it all figured out. So he drags this tramp into the house. But why would she do that? Brian said with doubt in his voice. Are you stupid, or are you just pretending to be? Norman looked at him with annoyance. She's after the old man's money, of course. It's not just a couple or 3 million, it's a fortune. I don't know, said Brian. She seemed pretty honest and open to me. I see she's charmed you too, said Norman. But it's up to you. You just watch out that we'll be left with nothing after the old man's death. He was going to bequeath the company to you and me, and now he'll just as soon rewrite his will and leave everything to his granddaughter. He spat on the ground with annoyance. Well, even if he did, it'd be fair, Brian shrugged. She's his only relative. Even if she is his only relative, Norman said indignantly. How long has he known her? A few hours. We've been working with him for years. We're more related to him than anyone else, and now we're going to lose everything because of this insolent girl. So you're worried about the inheritance? Brian was taken aback. You're a cynic, Norman. Yes, I am, he said sharply. I put everything I've got into this company. I work from morning till night. This company is my everything, you know. I don't want it to go to some stupid chicken. But your want isn't going to change anything, Brian grinned. What can you do now? There's nothing you can do about it. We'll see what I can do, Norman grinned slyly. But he said nothing more. Mr. Jasper had indeed decided to rewrite the will. He didn't want to prolong the process. He really was not old. Anything could happen to him at any time. However, he kept his plans to go to the notary secret from Jennifer. He didn't want to embarrass her too much. The girl still hadn't got used to the role of his granddaughter and still felt awkward in the huge, luxurious house. When her grandfather had suggested she go shopping and update her wardrobe, she had only waved her head negatively and quietly objected. I have a pair of jeans and t-shirts. I don't need new clothes yet. Thank you. Those things are still intact. Jesus, Jennifer, he shook his head. Do you only buy new clothes when the old ones are torn and worn out? Sometimes you just have to treat yourself. But Jennifer repeated, I don't need anything yet. Thank you. Mr. Jasper also talked to Jennifer about the future, finding out what she would like to do. Confused, the girl confessed that she had always been attracted to the world of dance. However, she didn't have to explain that. Mr. Jasper could see for himself how talented she was. Would you like to study at the Academy of Choreography? He suggested. I'll make sure you get in without any problems. Jennifer's eyes went wide. Really? There's a huge competition, I heard. It's impossible for a mere mortal to get in on a budget, or even a fee-paying student, and it costs a lot of money to study there. Don't worry about that, smiled my grandfather. I have enough authority and connections to get you on the budget, although, believe me, I'd have enough money even for paid tuition. Tell me the main thing, do you want to study there yourself? Honestly, don't try to please me. Tell me what you think. I don't want to put pressure on anyone else to study. Honestly? Jennifer raised her eyes dreamily to the sky. I really do. I'm crazy. If I could get in, it would be a dream come true. Mr. Jasper grinned good-naturedly. You'll get in then. Dreams should come true, especially for young and talented girls. Jennifer had a whole new life. Sometimes she even thought she was dreaming a wonderful dream. She was afraid that one day she would open her eyes and find that everything had dissipated like a morning mist. And in fact, she had no loving, caring grandfather, no choreographic academy, no new friends, no Brian. Yes, the grandfather's assistant, gray-haired and smiling blonde Brian, began unobtrusively courting the girl. At first, it seemed to her that she was just making up all the signs of attention he was giving her. But then she became convinced it was serious. When Brian looked at Jennifer, there was so much admiration and tenderness in his eyes that her stomach began to flutter butterflies. Jennifer didn't like the behavior of his colleague Norman. When they crossed paths in Mr. Jasper's office, she sometimes caught his heavy, gloomy, unkind gaze, from which she wanted only to cover herself with her hand and shiver. One day she overheard a fragment of a conversation between Brian and Norman. You're a good boy, Norman said with a wicked chuckle. You're so quick, aren't you? What do you mean? Brian asked glumly. I don't understand. Oh, come on, he doesn't get it, he said, frowning. Commendable. Someone he's talking about, Jennifer thought. Who's he talking about? Brian frowned. Is it about me? She wasn't sure she'd heard and understood everything correctly. After all, one could be wrong. Still, those words kept her mind on them. She continued to think about them for days. One day, Mr. Jasper asked her to stop by his office. At lunchtime, he said, we'll have to go somewhere on business. No sooner had Jennifer stepped into the lift than someone immediately jumped in after her. She recognized the second passenger as Norman with distaste. She hated to be in a cramped car with him, but not to jump out now? That would be quite foolish. She looked away, but she could still see in the mirror that Norman was looking at her. He did not even try to hide his dislike. His lips curved squeamishly. Why does he hate me so much? Jennifer shuddered. I haven't done anything to him. Norman was the first to break the long silence. What are you doing here? He asked ironically. Jennifer shrugged her shoulders. Grandpa asked me to stop by today. Said we had some business to attend to. A notary, I think. I didn't quite get it, she explained simply. She didn't understand, did she? Norman grinned. What a way to pretend to be an innocent lamb. It was offensive and really incomprehensible. So Jennifer remained silent. To the notary, then? Norman repeated meaningfully. Good for Brian, he got it in time, so he might get something. What's Brian got to do with it? Jennifer didn't get it again. Why do you keep talking in riddles? Do you want to know what I mean? Norman squinted, and in the depths of his dark eyes there was a sinister light. You mean you want to know the truth? He emphasized the last word with his intonation. She nodded. Of course I do. But then he firmly pressed the button for the top floor. We need to talk without witnesses. Where are we going? Jennifer was confused. Onto the roof. No one will interfere with us there. The top floor did indeed have a rooftop exit. Jennifer looked at the view from the top of the roof and was afraid. Norman, on the other hand, seemed afraid of nothing. He walked to the very edge and looked down fearlessly. People from that height looked like ants. What was it you wanted to tell me? Jennifer reminded him in a shaky voice, anxious to get out of here. Why do you think Brian started courting you? Norman answered the question with a question. The answer was obvious, but Jennifer realized that there was a catch. Because he liked me, she suggested uncertainly. Norman laughed heartily. Naive. He's just after your money. Jennifer frowned. What are you talking about? I don't have any. Well, you don't now, but you will soon, when the old man's gone. Norman said dismissively. You're his heiress. That's why he called you here, to make it official with the notary today. Norman, how can you say that about my grandfather? The old man's going to drop out. Jennifer looked at him with regret. Tell me you don't secretly dream of it. Norman laughed, drilling her with his gaze. All people want to have as much money and power as possible. Do you dream of getting your paw into your grandfather's fortune? Brian dreams of seducing you, and thus get his hands on Mr. Jasper's money. I wouldn't be surprised if he proposes to you within the next few days. Jennifer looked at him with regret. What about you? Are you like the only clean-cut one among us? We're all thinking about self-interest and you're not. Why not? Norman agreed. I'm just like you, practical. It's just that unlike you hypocrites, I don't pretend to be an angel. Yes, I always dreamed of owning your grandfather's company, and by golly, I would have. The old man's already prepared a will. I would have taken over his company if it wasn't for you. You're a hard man to find, he shouted, looking at Jennifer with fury. She was startled by the force of his hatred. Her foot twisted, and Jennifer almost fell. Run away from here, her temples rattled. He's completely insane. But barely had she made an attempt to step past Norman inside when he blocked her path, grabbed the girl's arm and twisted it sharply. Jennifer cried out in pain. Where are you going? He whispered. Grandpa's waiting, Jennifer said in a shaky voice. He won't, Norman grinned. After all, he was used to it. First his wife, then his daughter, then his granddaughter. If you go too, the old man will take it as a fate, as his own damn fate. What do you want to do to me? The girl turned pale. I'm nothing, he openly mocked her. You yourself will now go to the edge of the roof, fall down. Oh my, what a carelessness, what an unfortunate and tragic accident. I tried to save you, of course, but I didn't have time. That's exactly what I'm going to tell everyone. You monster. Jennifer exhaled in a trembling voice. Maybe I am, but no one can prove it. And most importantly, the old man's will leave everything as it was. I'll be part owner of the company. With these words, he grabbed Jennifer by the shoulders and threw her over the low rim of the roof to the outside. She clutched at the sleeves of his jacket with her fingers and hung over the abyss, desperately wiggling her legs and trying to climb back up. Let go. Norman wheezed, trying to unclench her fingers. You fool, you idiot. Help, Jennifer screamed with all her might. Jennifer's fingers were weakening. In another moment, she would fall into this void, into this abyss, and in a few more seconds she would crash to the pavement. Somebody help. She screamed with exertion. Norman was still trying to throw her off him. As the girl was pulling him down with all her weight, Jennifer felt that she had little strength left. That's it. It's over. I've lost, she thought. At that moment, a whirlwind came at Norman from behind. A moment later, someone yanked Jennifer's arm so sharply that she cried out in piercing pain. She was dragged up over the edge so that she scraped her knees against it. Then she was also abruptly released, and the girl collapsed heavily to the floor. And in another second, she saw two male figures, clutching in a desperate scramble, skating across the roof. One of them was Norman, and in the other she was surprised to recognize Brian and almost cried with relief. How timely had he turned up? He had literally saved her life. If it hadn't been for him, she'd be nothing but a wet spot by now. Do you want to order yourself the whole company? Norman wheezed, trying to punch Brian, but the man prevented him from doing so. No way. I don't have the guts. I and only I should be at the helm. You're out of your mind, Brian retorted, trying to dodge another blow. You measure everything in terms of money, not feelings. I don't care about the company. You see why you're trying to stop me if you don't care. Norman swung round and punched Brian angrily in the face. His head jerked and blood spurted from his nose. Because I love Jennifer, you jerk. Jennifer was outraged. She realized belatedly that she should call for help. She tried to reach for the phone, but the arm Brian had pulled her by, pulling her upstairs, was pierced with savage pain. Then the girl clumsily got up and headed for the hatch through which they had entered the roof. There was no more time to climb down the ladder, so Jennifer simply stuck her head out through that hatch and screamed, seemingly to the entire multi-story building. Help, somebody, help over here. At the same moment, Jennifer saw the guards running towards her and desperately waved her healthy arm at them. Over here on the roof. Faster, please, they'll kill each other. And then from a great nervous strain of strength left her, and the girl lost consciousness. The media was buzzing about the incident for a long time, every time coming across another headline like attempted murder of millionaire's only granddaughter. Jennifer shuddered and covered with cold sweat. In the end, her grandfather, Mr. Jasper, got angry and forbade her to visit news sites and read newspapers. But the girl continued to have nightmares. Again and again, she saw herself hanging over the abyss and woke up screaming. Mr. Jasper took her away from the hustle and bustle for a couple of weeks to the sea, where he also had his own house. It was not as big and luxurious as the one in Washington, but it was cozy right on the coast. As it turned out, Brian had dislocated her arm. Not on purpose, of course, but trying to save her life. But the arm healed terribly slowly, which caused Jennifer great inconvenience, and she missed the young man. But after that nightmare, he never wrote or called her. Grandfather had mentioned in passing that Brian had been hurt too. I think he even had a slight concussion. But Jennifer still resented him for forgetting about her. He said he loved her up there on the roof. Norman was awaiting trial. Jennifer didn't want to hear from him or remember him, and only hoped he would get what he deserved. Mr. Jasper was so shaken by his assistant's treachery that he too did not want to know anything more about him. The days passed lazily and in the same way. Jennifer slept a lot, ate fresh fruit, walked along the beach, and bathed. Physically, she was already quite healthy, but her soul was longing. One evening, having bathed and leaving the sea, she saw a familiar figure on the shore. Her heart beat faster. At first, Jennifer even thought that she was mistaken. But no, as she got closer, she realized that she couldn't mistake the blonde hair, the laughter, and the gray eyes for anyone else's. Brian, she breathed out and threw herself into his open arms. "Why didn't you tell me you were coming?" she exclaimed, her face pressed against his shirt, dying of happiness. "I wanted to surprise you," he said, kissing the top of her head. "What took you so long?" She pounded her fists on his chest in feigned fury. "I've been imagining all sorts of things." "I didn't want to scare you with my creepy look," Brian laughed and explained. "Jennifer, I had bruises all over my face. Norman beat me up pretty bad. I was waiting for it to heal." "You didn't want to propose to the girl you love with such a handsome man." Jennifer flared up and was confused. Quietly repeating proposal after him, he nodded and gazed into her eyes with excitement. "Perhaps you've decided it's too soon. After all, we haven't met that long ago. But I know for a fact that you're the only one I want to spend the rest of my life with. I don't need anyone else." Jennifer was silent, stunned by his confession and proposal, ready to die of happiness. But Brian interpreted her silence in his own way. "I understand," he said after a moment's hesitation. "After what Norman said to you on the roof, it must be hard for you to trust people again. He made me out to be some kind of Alfonso, after your money, after your grandfather's company." Jennifer hastily covered his lips with her palm. "Stupid," she said fondly. "Oh my God, you're so stupid. How could you think I would believe such ridiculous stories? If you really wanted money and power, it would have been in your interest to let Norman kill me. And then you would have handed him over to the police, and, in effect, you would have been the only candidate for the inheritance. You saved my life." She looked him seriously in the eye. "Do you expect me to need any more explanations after that?" Jennifer took her hand away from his lips, and Brian caught her hand and kissed her delicate fingers. "I don't get it, do I?" he asked. "Is that a yes or a no? Will you marry me?" Jennifer shook her head. "Well, I'm telling you, stupid. Don't you get it? How did you ever get so far in your career with that cluelessness of yours?" "I can't think straight with you around," Brian joked. "I've lost my head in love. Why would I want a husband who's clueless?" The girl continued to try his patience. "He's obviously amused," said Mr. Jasper, who had appeared out of nowhere. "Well, stop torturing the boy, really. Come on, come on." Jennifer laughed, nodded, and looking at Brian with shining eyes, exhaled happily. "I do." After buying a bouquet of lilacs from the little girl, Oberon reluctantly shuffled home. Barely entering the apartment, she froze. Aubrey was funny, such a sweet and cozy woman. Such cute, a little ridiculous individuals made her face involuntarily blurred into a smile. For some reason, it became immediately clear that before you a good-natured person who will not do meanness, will not betray, is not sick of dirt. Where did such confidence come from? Small height, dense build, hilarious redhead, all some kind of sunny, with a scattering of freckles, bright blue eyes, chubby pink cheeks. She walked on the ground a little lopsidedly, like a bear cub, a marvelous shade. People with this appearance from childhood teased red-haired clown. Oberon was not exempt from this fate. Having long since come to terms with such a bright appearance, it is characteristic that the mockery after the first acquaintance with a fiery red-haired girl, and then a girl and a woman, always stopped very quickly. Oberon conquered offenders with her naive directness, unwillingness to give a vicious rebuff in return. Why offend such a harmless creature? It was more pleasant to be friends with her. In this case, Mother Nature managed to award the girl a lot of dexterity in children's games. At school physical education classes, she did not lag behind her peers. Moreover, was the leader in many pranks in the kindergarten. It was Oberon took the little gang out of the territory through a gap in the fence, as the leader led the kids to the neighboring garages, where the bravest were offered to test the ride of courage. The rules were simple: climb to the roof of one of the garages on a rickety, and someone forgotten at the gate ladder. Then you go to the garage closest to the children's institution, from which you jump into the sandbox standing by the fence. So that the friendly team was not afraid, the first to do all these simple manipulations, Oberon. In a minute, her ringing voice, already encouraging, was heard from the platform behind the swings. "Let's be quiet, or Kira Swan will notice." Everyone climbed, crossed, and jumped, except for Kieran, who was long and skinny. He'd always been a bit of an outlier in their older group. Why on earth had he even gotten into this adventure in the first place? Accepting the jumpers, Oberon seated them on a bench. While the teacher was chatting with her colleague about something, Oberon went to the eye again. The confused Kiran was shuffling from foot to foot at the garage, not daring to step on the bottom step of the fragile ladder. "Give me your hand, I'll take the first one, and you follow me," said Aubins. From the garage, too, jumped off with a strong duet. Hand in hand, with briefcases later, they went to the same first grade. The irredeemable ones, the little bully Aubins, and the unintelligent Kiran. She dragged him along with her in all her mischief. They walked from school past the fountain near the plant office, the furniture factory. September is still hot in their southern town, and they are tired after school. Why not cheer up? At home, Aubins has only an old grandmother. She won't notice they're both wearing their school uniforms. Jump over the edge to where the water's up to their waists. Gracious coolness, tight jets of water falling from above. It's great, especially since Kiran's mom has no time to take care of him. For months he was in the care of a nanny, always trying to escape to the house of a girlfriend, where cozy smells, delicious buns and cherry compote. A 3-liter jar with this sweet delicacy is never outnumbered here. They come quietly in wet clothes. Kiran even had an old tracksuit to change into. And they would come to their grandmother were hungry, were exhausted. So they grew up in this modest old-fashioned apartment with carpets on the walls, crystal on the shelves, an empty chest of drawers with thick fluffy plaids, in which they wrapped themselves in winter, the two of them to watch their favorite cartoons about Tom and Jerry on TV. Aubins' parents were oilmen who spent their whole life somewhere near a drilling rig, designing it themselves, then controlling whether there were any failures in its work. They would go to their daughter's house for a couple of summer months, and then all together they would go to the Black Sea. It takes only 5 hours to drive from them to the coast. It's a paradise there. The salty reservoir rolled on the sand or pebbles with foamy waves. The sun covered my skin with bronze tan. Palm trees and magnolias glistened with foliage. The last representatives of tropical flora also dizzy their heads with the sweet, fragrant aroma of their white, graceful flowers. There was even an amusing incident in their family. One evening, while everyone in the boarding house was at a dance, Oberon's father, Vincent, climbed a tree and plucked a fragile magnolia flower for his wife. In the room, they put it in a water pitcher. It's a good thing the maid stopped by before they went to bed to see if they needed anything. "You're out of your minds, dear guests," she gasped. "It is good if you just have a headache from this insidious plant. And there are cases of people with allergies, which reaches anaphylactic shock. One tourist, the same fan of romance and magnolias, from us once barely managed to get to the hospital." Without waiting for objections, the maid quickly picked up the jug of already fading beauty and took it to the balcony. "That's where you go and admire it," she grumbled. "I'll bring you another container for drinking water. What do you think you're doing, poisoning yourselves here in our institution?" The next day, Vincent dutifully went to the local market and brought his red-haired wife a bunch of large daisies and a large watermelon with thick black seeds and bright red, juicy flesh. The incident was exhausted, and the new experience was recorded for the future. By the way, Aubins had been born such a pretty redhead for a reason. She was a smaller version of her mother, Stacy, a carbon copy of herself. Vincent, who had come to the windows of the hospital on the day of Aubins' birth, couldn't contain his emotions. "Yes, Stacy, you're obviously two golden red-haired creatures in one family. It's a treasure trove. There's a reason you were so toxic the whole pregnancy. Our daughter could braid her hair out of that fire fleece." When in her childhood, after watching a cartoon about a red-headed redhead tried to start complexes because of her hair color, Stacy stopped them once and for all. "Daughter, take a good look at me," Stacy said. "Has my hair the color of shiny copper ever hindered me in life? My red locks, like a generous sun, kissed on the top of my head. You're always on display, always bright and always happy. Your life, too, will be if not a constant celebration, then certainly not a boring everyday. Believe in yourself, Aubins. Appearance is a shell. I wish you had a heart of gold. Good people get back 100-fold the warmth they give, even if they forget the good deeds themselves." Aubins remembered her mother's words from that time. It was as if she had stamped on a metal surface an inscription dear to her heart, the kind of engraving one usually writes on commemorative gifts. She loved her parents fanatically, despite the fact that she had seen little of them. And now her gray-haired enthusiasts, Vincent and Stacy, were away working on new drilling technology. How many young engineers are there around? And no, if something complicated is being implemented in a distant enterprise, Vincent and Stacy are as good as gone. Aubins thought. She had long since gotten used to their long absences, having learned to be quite independent after her grandmother's death. She'd gotten married early, almost right out of high school. A young married lady is not a big deal. You have to live up to your status. Aubins' husband was that childhood and youthful friend, the unforgettable Kieran. They had been so used to being inseparable since kindergarten that their marriage was taken for granted. Love is different, isn't it? Some people build relationships on the flames of passion, while others spend a long time choosing, courting, and pursuing the object of their desire. Kieran and Aubins had another version, which is usually called love friendship. It seems that no one sighs for anyone. Under the moon on the bench stars do not admire. Candy and bouquets in the heart does not carry. But it was astonishing that such a phenomenon could be written down in the new medical discoveries. It became difficult for Kieran to breathe without Aubins, and panic appeared. Aubins had to know every minute what was going on with Kieran, what her heartfelt friend was doing. Kieran seemed to really need help, or at least a kind word of approval from Aubins. But she wasn't around. They both did evenly in school, no brilliant successes, but no embarrassing failures either. After receiving his diploma, Kieran wisely decided not to go to the local technical university, which trained tamers of computer hardware. Instead, he chose a down-to-earth profession installing smart machines, connect everything intelligently, fill them with optimal stuffing. The basics of this profession began to pop out at him already by the end of the first year. Which of his friends or neighbors to help with a laptop or desktop PC? He never said no. Soon the neighborhood was posted ads I install and configure computers, inexpensive with his home phone number. He and Kieran had a long laugh that Kira's grandmother now had to be paid a salary to act as a silent dispatcher. She answered the phone, recording the client's details. By evening, the list of those wishing to use the services of the young master was already ready. Surprisingly, there were many orders for installation and connection. Soon Kieran and Aubins could afford frequent trips to their favorite pastry shop with divinely delicious cakes and coffee. By the winter session, they had accumulated a sum of money in their unexpected expenses piggy bank. It would be enough for their common beautiful dream to see St. Petersburg in all its glory. Both of their parents were away for long periods of time, so Kieran didn't need to come home after class. He worked in the improvised workshop they had built in the apartment, coming only at night. His mother took care of her son's upbringing strictly by phone at 22 at check call. Kier, are you all right? Eating regularly, preparing for the session. Yes, Mom, everything is fine, he answered. A theatrical pause followed. Then I can work in peace. I've got a lot on my plate. And Kieran's mom would disappear again with the dial tone. He sometimes didn't even know in which city his mom was shining on the stage at that moment. Aubins and his grandparents, as she affectionately called them, were no less punctilious. Their interrogation was usually meticulous, but it was Vincent's grandmother, not Aubins, who peppered them with questions. She reported cheerfully that everything was going according to plan, that her granddaughter had passed her credits and exams on time, without arrears. And now the girl was going with Kieran to the northern capital. Even airplane tickets have already been bought. After the conversation with her grandmother, Stacy and Vincent looked at each other. Don't even get me started, the man said. They're both 18 now. Kieran is a decent guy. I trust him. He would never hurt our girl. Aubins has chosen a very interesting profession for herself, organizer of festive events, specialization event manager. Lucky that there is such a faculty right in their city, at the Federal University. It is called, however, ornate crowdsourcing and event management. But the group was excellent. The guys and girls were all creative individuals. A month after the beginning of the classes, they were already having fun at the kapustnik, singing in the choir, learning national dances, learning the science of stage craftsmanship, and studying the psychology of influencing hearts. Aubins did not just come home from school, but flew on wings, joyfully sharing all her achievements with her grandmother and Kieran. So both of them passed the session without any problems. Aubins and Kieran flew to Peter, a city that was both majestic and silent from the heavy frost, at lunchtime. After settling into their room, they immediately rushed to the Georgian cafe in the building across the street. Khachapuri with cheese, khinkali filled with minced meat, hot juice and spicy Abkhazian snacks. Everything was unusual, and therefore delicious. They ordered themselves a glass of red wine like adults. Now it seemed to them that they were not students, but solid, experienced men and women. Next, everything happened rapidly. They came out of the friend zone, barely returning to the room. They had fallen asleep in each other's arms 1,000 times before in the evening to the peaceful hum of the television, always hugging each other in a friendly way when meeting and parting, kissing each other on the cheek, touching their lips to each other's foreheads if there was a suspicion of fever. There were no vibes, no chemistry, which seemed to appear at such close communication of young people. And they had never in all that time fallen in love with any of their peers on the side. Among their classmates, they were an unspoken couple, only together, only next to each other. All the gossip had bypassed them, but their hormones were dormant, not pushing them to sensual actions. Here in St. Petersburg, they, inexperienced, young, heated by wine and impressions, became close so naturally, as if they had already entered heaven. The full moon smiled, winking at the shining stars. Young people, may the heavens grant you personal happiness. Bobby and Kieran, engrossed in each other, did not hear the moon's whisper. And was there one? Maybe the wind and snow had dreamed it all on that magical St. Petersburg evening. The trip to northern Palmyra was a revelation for the guys in many ways. They lived in a miniature hotel on Maratha Street, a few meters from Nevsky Prospect. The temperature outside the window was increasingly dropping to -15 degrees Celsius. There was an additional cold and dampness from the numerous reservoirs. The snow crunched underfoot. We didn't walk for a long time. We saved ourselves in cafes. We took several cups of different teas, arguing which spices gave it a particularly memorable flavor. Sometimes we had a couple of shots of sweet liqueur or mulled wine. For dinner, we brought sweets to the room. From the cafe candy shop again, they piled tea or coffee and enjoyed socializing. The romantic journey flashed by like a single day. They returned home, as always, holding hands. Peter had won their hearts forever and bonded them together even more tightly. A month later, Aubie felt distinctly sick. She felt nauseous in the mornings when her grandmother baked pancakes for breakfast, and in the evenings when she cooked pasta patties for her. Stacy was far away from her daughter at that moment. Aubie was certainly not a naive little girl. She had long ago bought a pregnancy test from the drugstore that showed the coveted 2 stripes. She broke the news to Kieran, who immediately reassured her. "I know, my dear." "How do you end up so close to the opposite sex?" Aubin asked. "My mother won't be home for 2 months. She has another tour. I don't intend to wait for her consent. Kieran and I have decided to get married." "Make sure you tell her. We'll apply tomorrow. We'll be officially married in a month. Our baby must have a father and a mother. The decision is not open for discussion." "You, Kieran, make it simple," she said. "Where will we live and with what money?" "It's nothing," he replied. "My mother is in a common law marriage with a new man, travels with him in cities. Then he takes her to resorts to rest. The apartment is completely at our disposal. When the deadline comes, you'll take a sabbatical. I've already gotten used to the orders. Word of mouth works. Some clients recommend me to others. I've also prepared a new batch of ads with a different contact number." Mother Kieran, actress Rose Arnold, though she was a supporting actress in the local theater, but on tour in the reserve cast, went always with great pleasure. And Kieran's fathers were constantly changing. A lot of husbands, a lot of passions, so necessary for a creative person. Otherwise, how to play love on stage. In the affairs of her grown-up son, she as long ago did not interfere, almost stopped the daily evening interrogations. Rose firmly adhered to the position bad news finds people. If it is still quiet, then everything goes its way. The last man, Rose, was from the theater commercial circles and suited her most of all with his generosity. To be fair, outwardly Rose Arnold in her 50s was still very good-looking. Over 40 years old in the evening light, as she herself joked. Even detractors had nothing to say. The well-groomed coquette was already a little over 50, but she did not lift anything heavier than cutlery. She was helped by her housekeeper and her son's nanny. What an enviable life. Official marriages in the passport Rose Arnold was 3 pieces. but unofficial romances she had not countless. And who needs that boring arithmetic when it comes to Rose? She had one specialty: she could sing romances in a thick, low voice. Although she did not learn vocals and did not learn, but will raise to the sky large languid eyes with skillfully lined black pencil eyelashes, slightly raised in a graceful question eyebrow, open sensual full lips and draggy told me be you mine and I will live. Passion burning. Another man with a delicate mental organization fell into the net set Rose. Looked at her like a rabbit on a boa constrictor, hurried to fulfill any of her whims, opened access to his accounts and cash. Rose wasted no time, pampered herself, her favorite, as much as she could, knowing that she could not keep her lover for long. She had an empty, boring soul. God had hurt her intellect. But she herself considered further mental development as an empty occupation. She could not hold a conversation in a decent society. She was more silent, parading around the hall and showing another flashy outfit. Men with money are often not fools. They quickly lost interest in her and disappeared from her horizon. The trouble was that Rose, like any man, inexorably aged. Not every worthy and rich fish is no longer caught in her predatorily arranged nets. She did not want to look at the smaller specimens, carefully watched her behavior and words to keep her partner longer. And this time she did not let go of her young lover even for a moment. Men were becoming fewer and fewer, and age was getting scarier. Vincent and Stacy took the news of Aubins' imminent marriage and pregnancy to heart. They agreed to celebrate the wedding in the summer during a vacation, when they will be in their hometown, and Rose Arnold will have a break in the tour schedule. The young people were now leading a shared family life for two homes. After university classes, Oberon and Kieran would go to their grandmother's house for lunch, and then go to Kieran's apartment. The boy would again fiddle with another order at home, or go out on a call. Oberon was preparing for her seminars, running an unpretentious household. She began to take lessons from her grandmother, a skilled cook, and soon she could cook something simple for herself and her young husband. In the registry office, they were signed a month after the application was submitted. The newlyweds joked, remembering a quote from the old Soviet movie Girls What a Family: Kieran, husband and wife. You can die laughing. And they both started laughing. Young and green, everything still seemed so magical, serenely joyful. Parents on both sides did not interfere in their life together, hoping for the prudence of children. Grandmother looked after from afar. She bought her granddaughter fruit, so that in her interesting position the body received vitamins, then gave her now legitimate grandson Kieran a warm scarf, so that he did not catch a cold running on calls throughout the neighborhood. Already spring has powerfully entered its rites. The end of April. When she opened the window, a floral scent wafted through the apartment. In their southern city, there were so many lilacs, garden, Persian, and wild. For as long as Oberon and Kieran could remember, they had associated spring with the fluffy white and purple flowers on the branches of the shrubbery, and with bunches of blooming lilacs in the house, arranged in vases. By the May holidays, there was a general restlessness at the university at Aubins. There were several reasons for this. The practical exams were just around the corner, at which the students would show their acquired skills on the institute's scaffolding in the large assembly hall. The noisy competition of numbers was attended by representatives of advertising, entertainment agencies, workers of show business, movie industry, experts from television, including one of the presenters of the Central TV channel. During a program devoted to dating, one of the presenters once said worthy suitors are still puppies, and it was much the same with the Oberon students. There were only a few really talented guys for the whole stream. Experienced producers had to keep their ears open in order not to miss a diamond that could be earned in the future. Here you could get a job, get someone's attention for a prospect, and participate in casting. By the time the performances began, Auberin's tummy had already rounded out a bit, but to avoid drawing attention with her interesting situation, she chose the role of a red-headed clown for a defense number. Spacious bright green jumpsuit, yellow shirt with a brown checkered pattern. There was almost no makeup on her face, just a plastic tube nose, some mascara on her eyes and lip gloss. Her copper hair didn't even need to be specially styled. Frizzy swirls stuck out in all directions, as the image demanded. The committee unanimously gave Oberon an excellent for a successful reprise. As she sat down in the auditorium to catch her breath and watch her fellow students perform, a man in an expensive suit and bright pink shirt approached her. "Hello, Oberon. I enjoyed your number. I would like to invite you to perform at our corporate event." Sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Andrei Vladimirovich. The details of our cooperation, if you agree, we'll discuss later. The bewildered Oberon didn't even have time to reply as the man disappeared somewhere. She feverishly thought that this couldn't be, because it could never be. She had created her clowned carrot top not for the public, but for herself, putting into his facial expressions and gestures a part of her cheerful soul. She did not expect that her experimental image could seriously appeal to anyone. At that moment, her buddy Milachka plopped into the seat next to Aubins. "Abi, don't you get it?" she exclaimed. "The great and terrible Andrew Smolyakov himself just sat next to you. His modeling agency, Aphrodite's Favor, has girls from all over our county signing up for auditions 6 months in advance. Do you know how he was nicknamed in bohemian circles? Janie." "Who? Why Janie?" Mila shrugged, just jealous of his success. "His nickname is the 3 R's, which means dude, dodger, and dodger. He is an excellent swindler, but what a pro. He's got a diamond in the rough. If he spotted someone in the crowd, expect a brilliant career in the modeling business, to file on the world's catwalks, fame and fans. What kind of questions would he have for you? You're a mother, you're not in the trend, and you're pregnant. Is Andrew losing his business acumen?" Oberon didn't know what to say to this agitated speech. A void in her mind. She was more concerned about why Kieran hadn't returned her phone call. She was so eager to share with him that she passed the credit she dreaded with a yay. At the same time, Andrew, to whom Mila had just sung praises, was sharing a new idea with his assistant. "I found a unique person, a young lady performing a skit with a red-haired clown. It will be a furor when we release her on our stage. The contrast between natural beauty and nature's jokes on her appearance. Have you seen this person? She's a walking misunderstanding. But she's a sweetheart, a mix of red hair and spontaneity. What kind of person would take her place? The other one would have burned with shame and complexes, but this one doesn't. Apparently she lives with her head held high. I even saw a wedding ring on her hand. Found a lover of such ugliness." And Andrew, very pleased with his caustic humor, laughed. It was good that the naive Abi did not hear his words. Although who knows, maybe Andrew's words would have hurt Aubins, but would have saved her from a great misfortune. Andrew's assistant found the young woman the very next day. The background information was as follows: a famous modeling agency was planning another show. Aubins' task as a red-haired clown was to entertain the audience in the pauses when the models from Andrew's agency would be changed into the next outfits from the collection of a local designer. The action was to take place in a fashionable hotel, stylized as a medieval Gothic castle. All the capital's bowmen was to gather at this outlandish performance. Aubins, who for participation in the show was offered a fabulous fee by student standards, was not afraid of the stage and the audience in a huge hall with velvet armchairs. But the hotel complex itself struck her at first sight with its mysterious atmosphere. With her exuberant imagination, she immediately imagined nightly tournaments, beautiful ladies in lavish dresses, balls, intrigue and unearthly love of imaginary heroes. Oberyn did not move through the halls like a bear this time. She had even muted that ability. She walked like a fairy with a magic wand in her hands, mentally touching people and objects, immersing them in the fairy tale that was already being born in her head. On the improvised catwalk, everything happened exactly as Andrew had planned. The fashion collection was done in black and white colors. It had a cold, sharp, steely sheen. When a red-haired clown appeared on stage during the breaks, the difference in theme was so great that everyone involuntarily admired again the talent of the young clothing designer and his innovative views on how femme fatalists should look like. The intended effect was 100% realized. Aubins, inspired by her successful performances in front of so many people, decided to have a little snack. A buffet was set up in the lobby bar. The mom-to-be put a couple of canopies on a miniature plate, took a glass of lemonade from the tray, and sat down in a secluded place on a soft sofa. After a couple of minutes, she heard muffled voices. In one of them, she recognized the commanding tone of her local patron. "Joshua, have you seen those ginger ugly things?" "Poor girl," someone said. "You don't often see such a hopeless case of total lack of beauty. You are the very creator of female goddesses, to whom you give long, slender legs, to whom you give deep, expressive eyes. And who will you give a luxurious hair? Can you believe she has a wedding ring on her hand? I can't even imagine a man who could sleep with her of his own free will. Aubins dropped the canapé from her hands. Andrew, a well-known person in the city, philanthropist, businessman, owner of the realm of female beauty, said all this with such contempt, as if he were talking about some disgusting insect. You see such an ugly thing, you want to step on it and crush it. All of Stacy's words about the special charm of redheads were instantly forgotten. In her head, as if in a cramped cage, her thoughts rattled. The program is over. I don't want to wait for any honorarium. Get out of here. Out now. Aubins ran out of the lobby bar and immediately ran into the two men talking with glasses of cognac in their hands. Damn, Andrew, your stage vis-a-vis just heard us talking, one of them said. Hold her and calm her down. But it was no longer possible to hold Aubins, who was rushing forward. She started rapidly down the narrow spiral staircase to the first floor. The wrought iron railings beneath the smooth, shiny handrails were all decorated with graceful roses, so skillfully crafted that they were indistinguishable from real flowers of royalty, with buds, leaves, and thorns blooming. Near the next flight of stairs, the wide pants of his stage costume caught on one of the sharp metal branches below. The red-haired clown was still running desperately downward, but the sturdy fabric was already caught on the metal. Aubins flailed her arms ridiculously in the air, and like a puppet, she was hung from the treacherous piece of jewelry. The last thing she felt before she lost consciousness was multiple jabs of something hard in her chest, stomach, and legs. Drops of blood instantly began to appear on the steps. As the crowd rushed to the scene, the picture was gruesome. Hanging from the metal rose pattern under the railing was a bright redhead named Aubins. Only now she wasn't laughing at all, nor was she uttering funny phrases in a ringing voice. She was bleeding, and no one would ever know that a few minutes ago the heart and soul of this young woman had been bleeding, just like that. The ambulance arrived quickly. By then the hotel guards had already pushed the curious away from the scene of the accident. They were afraid to take Aubins down the stairs without medical intervention. The sight was horrific. Local paparazzi were sneakily clicking their phones, trying to get sensational facts that could then be sold to the media and the yellow press. There were many amateurs before the media. Someone was rubbing his hands together, rather rubbing his hands that Andrew was proud of it, and now it would take a long time to wash off. After such an incident, his reputation will be tarnished, and the whole business may be shaken if it turns out the racy background of what happened. Everyone was curious to the point of goosebumps. What pushed this handsome red-haired clown to run like Cinderella, whose time is running out at? At the hospital, Aubins went straight to the operating table. The baby could not be saved. Andrew, who learned that the red-headed clown he had hired was pregnant, grabbed his head. He had a long talk with Joshua, whom he persuaded to keep quiet if they were called to the police as witnesses to that violent conversation. The modeling agency had paid in full for Aubins' stay in a private room, where now and then throughout the day couriers came by with baskets of fruit, juices, chicken broth, and then other meals from the best restaurants in town. To meet with him, Aubins refused flatly. Only his assistant was allowed to enter the room, who brought a fee and an impressive bonus, ostensibly for the inconvenience caused. The already recovering young woman said to the employee Andrew, "As cut off, don't let your boss shake with fear." "No one will ever know the true cause of my fall down the stairs," Aubins said. "Tell him that verbatim. I'll take the money, why not? But he's the one buying the silence. I'm the one who thought I'd done my pay and allowance honestly. This is the end of our cooperation. I no longer wish to see anyone who has the slightest connection to Aphrodite's favor. Consider it a gesture of my goodwill." The aide conveyed what the chief had said verbatim. She even thought she heard a sigh of relief. It's a dark story, she thought to herself, but she didn't say anything like that out loud. She had been working with Smolyakov for a long time. She'd seen a lot of things around his controversial business. Kieran had been by Aubins' side ever since his wife and baby had suffered that terrible accident. He had even brought their old stove from home, where they liked to cook together. He covered it and prayed over the blanket. There were bunches of lilac flowers everywhere in the ward. Its sweet fragrance always knew how to lift the mood of the red-haired clown. A few days later, earlier than usual, Aubins' parents, Stacy, flew in from the north. She spoke at length with the doctor about the future possibilities of motherhood for her daughter. The doctor reassured her. 3 years with the baby would have to wait. The operation was serious, but we managed to preserve all childbearing functions. Aubins has lost a lot of blood. She's very weak now. Let her finish her studies in peace, get her diploma, and then we can think about the continuation of the family again. Rose obviously did not consider it her duty to come to at least morally support her son's young family. She took the news of the loss of her grandson with enthusiasm. "Kieran, don't let it go to waste," she said. "This child was too early a decision for you. You've only just turned 19. What kind of father are you? You've got a lot of snot to wipe off." Kieran was mentally glad his wife couldn't hear their dialogue. The memories of their loss and the tragedy that had played out in the marvelous Gothic hotel were too sad for Aubins. Aubins did not tell her husband about the conversation she had accidentally witnessed. She was released from the hospital and went to her studies. She avidly attended lectures and practical classes. Only she never wanted to wear her red-haired clown outfit again, no matter how her teachers and fellow students asked her to do so. After the summer session, Kieran, Aubins, and her parents went to the seaside together by car. Vincent loved to drive his old BMW. What did he call it? It was old, but it was old. But it was a beast. Nothing had happened to it because at the time it had been sitting in the garage. On vacation, they traveled everywhere they could. They lived in a small village, in one of the new hotels on the beachfront. You go out on the loggia in the room downstairs, 20 meters away. The sea is splashing. Behind the fence there was a park where the hotel guests could disappear as much as they wanted, and even for free. There was a small grove of pomegranate trees near the monument to Pushkin. Excursions were always wandering around the park itself, so Kieran and Aubins hid in a corner above the sea, next to the son of Russian poetry Alex. Here the young woman turned into the host of some holiday they had invented. Kieran became a kind spectator and in the 9th row. Who still remembers the unique creative legacy of Archie will immediately understand what we are talking about. In the evening, the rehearsed performance was shown to the parents, and there was not among the audience more grateful listeners. Aubins gradually withdrew. They spent a long time together splashing in the sea, and then went to the local market to buy amazing grapes, peaches, tart homemade wine. In the evening we had dinner on the loggia, and admired the marvelous moment when the orange ball of the sun kissed the emerald surface of the sea. Sunsets there were always fabulously beautiful. The clouds became pink, and the soul sang, flew somewhere upwards. Several times the whole family took a ride to the city. There on the quay another funny story happened to Aubins. Rather intrusive photographer with some animal on his shoulder insistently stretched out his hands to the red-haired woman and shouted. The animal turned out to be a chinchilla, which at once tangibly pulled Aubins' finger, then posed in her arms like a model, and did not want to let her go. The photographer, very surprised by the behavior of his assistant, thoughtfully said, "My Aubins' instincts are impeccable. She recognizes good people with a pure heart from a mile away." The photographer didn't even understand why the family was laughing at first. Vincent eagerly explained, "You've just taken a picture of your namesakes, your Aubins and our Aubins. I noticed from a distance." He and Kieran hugged their companions by the shoulders and they continued their walk along the picturesque promenade. This vacation was one of the most memorable events in Aubins' life. And then grief came to the house. Vincent's mother had died. She quietly went to heaven in her sleep. The empty apartment no longer smelled of freshly baked goods. Only the shelves of the pantry still held jars of cherry compote. True to tradition, the quiet, cultured grandmother Aubins had managed to prepare this summer season's favorite supplies. Folk wisdom says trouble doesn't come alone. It brings the next 6 months after the death of Grandma. Tragedy happened to the beautiful Rose Arnold. The accident was trivial. The actress did not want to part with high heels, even on winter boots. In a rare for the southern city period of ice, she slipped right on the tiny edge of the steps leading to the entrance. Rose took an unfortunate fall and broke her infamous femoral neck. Kieran had just turned in another winter session at the time. After his grandmother left, he and Janie had moved back into the apartment of Aubins' young parents. It had always seemed more familiar to them. And then, with a surprise from her mother, Aubins ran to the hospital to see Rose as if it were work. Her second mom turned out to be an extremely capricious woman. Kira Swan secretly left on the pretense of a touring emergency. It was as if she'd never been there. Kieran disappeared in the morning at the university. and then ran on the orders of his mother after the operation, which promised that she would be able to walk again after the injury. The ward and comforts were costly for the youth. Finally, after a couple months on hospital duty, all those expensive delicacies from the stores, morsels, specialty coffees, teas, and desserts, Rose Arnold was transported home with pomp, as if to the sound of an invisible orchestra, and settled on a disassembled sofa. Already on the way, she sang Oberon, either an ode to her daughter or a romance about her love for her daughter-in-law, with a mute plea in her eyes not to abandon her in such trouble. Kieran and Oberon went to live with Rose Arnold. Just a year after that tragedy with the red-haired clown. Outside the window, the fragrant lilacs were blooming again. Oberyn hoped that soon her mother-in-law would recover, and she and Kieran would live their old life again. A whole year passed in labor and care for Rose Arnold. The young woman rolled her grocery cart between the aisles at the supermarket and thought to herself, Rose's mom loves cranberry morsels. We're just out of it, and I've got to find a tea bag of chrysanthemum. They say it lowers blood pressure when it's cold. With her fracture, we don't need hypertension coming out. It's all coming from nerves. I happy, carefree living with her son Kieran, and she, at her elegant age, does not need unnecessary troubles. Oberyn's confidence has been boosted in recent months by a big change in her creative field. The breakthrough came unexpectedly. Once she was rushing home after classes at the university to quickly tell her husband what topic she got in her thesis, and almost knocked down some young woman. I turned around to apologize, and it turned out to be Polyakov's assistant who had brought her honorarium to the hospital. Abby wanted to get away. The memories associated with Aphrodite's favor were too painful, but that was not to be. Smolyakov's right hand grabbed her by the sleeve of her jacket and said, "You're just what I need. I was going to look for you. And here you yourself showed up." The woman smiled warmly and continued, "You've played a part in my career. It's up to you to clean up the mess." After the accident with the red-haired clown, I could no longer work with Andrew. I felt in my gut that he had a hand in the tragedy with you. I've known his partner Joshua a long time, so it wasn't hard for me to get him to talk and find out the truth. I couldn't look at the chief without contempt after those revelations, and Adam was pretty famous in modeling circles. I quit under a plausible pretext. Soon I found a new place, cleaner, more decent. I'm now in charge of children's parties, running my own company. My business is booming. Now I myself need an assistant with a golden, untainted heart like yours. Let's try to work together. The clouds seemed to part and the sun shone brightly around her. She had always secretly dreamed of working with children. The younger generation would never discuss her appearance. They would just enjoy the show. For a new part-time job took up with great enthusiasm. Reprisals in the play with the participation of puppets, Rostovi marionettes, a collection of colorful decorations in the entertainment office on the initiatives Oberyn not spared funds. All the more. All expenses quickly paid off, she continued to generate ideas. Only the request to return to the stage red-haired clown resolutely and uncompromisingly always rejected. She had almost no time for Kieran now. But he didn't take offense. He himself disappeared somewhere for days and evenings. He came home happy. Now they could afford to pamper poor, unhappy, sick Rose with more treats, new silk pajamas with luxurious lace, elite grapes, wine, which Rose used to treat her nerves. After the operation was a year, but the promises of doctors have not yet come true. Rose Arnold did not leave the sofa, to which Janie all the time carried trays with the next wishes of her mother-in-law. The woman was clearly not suffering from a lack of appetite or requests. At the bus stop near her mother-in-law's house, Oberyn saw a girl carrying fragrant lilac branches. The purple, fragrant flowers looked a little sad. They wanted to drink, to be in a moist environment. But passers-by were bustling past on their own. No one was going to buy lilacs. "How much do you want for spring happiness?" Oberyn asked the young saleswoman with a smile. "How much would you give for a date with spring?" The girl cheerfully picked up the game. Oberyn, who had just today received a fee for another series of birthdays, was generous, taking out a $1,000 bill from her purse. After thinking about it, she added a large Belgian chocolate bar. She was treated to it today by one of the moms of the kids who were guests at the children's party. The girl did not break down and gladly took both gifts. She tried to give Aubins the whole set of obviously barbarously broken lilac branches. The woman gave the young flower seller another warm smile and gave her a final pep talk. Soon people will start coming back from the day shift. A lot of people like lilacs. You'll sell all you can get in no time. And I'll have enough for this many branches. Good luck, my friend. The rest of the way to the apartment, Aubins kept bringing lilacs to her nose. Her snub nose greedily inhaled the sense of spring's awakening to life. How fortunate that today's holiday had been moved 2 hours earlier. She was able to free herself at an unscheduled time. Now she would put the dough for the cookies of her grandmother's famous delicious scones. She'll probably have time to boil some borscht too. She hadn't spoiled Kiran with a home-cooked meal in a long time. Both of them had no time. They sat on half-finished products. Only Rose Arnoldovna, who had been ill for a long time, drank fresh, strong broths. She's a sick person. She's supposed to be on the payroll. I tried to open the door to the apartment quietly. Her mother-in-law liked to take a nap during the day. Why bother her? On the threshold, she froze when she heard the ringing voice of her second mother, not pitiful as usual. Bella, my dear friend. That's me. All on the main roles in the theater did not take. But in vain in me died a great actress. For 6 months I've been playing that nasty Aubins by the nose, and she doesn't know a thing. Aubins turned into a mute question. Guess what? Rose Arnold was on the phone with her pal, a makeup artist from their theater, a talented actress. You know we paid for the surgery back then. Well, I'm back on my feet, but I can only walk around the apartment with a stick. And that's only when I'm home alone. Aubins, although my sister-in-law is easygoing. I just got a job. I'm about to graduate. Hunt will be looking after me so diligently. Even then, she continued, flicking her lighter and lighting another cigarette. Oh, how good it is that this is not a crypt. Red-haired Berzina didn't give me a grandchild then. As I imagine that now there would be one more of the same ugly redhead walking around the apartment, my heart would go straight down. How my Kiran started earning good money. Wouldn't you recognize him? He's grown up. He's handsome. It's not the kind of woman who should be his date now. Oh, you don't know our big news yet. Kiran's finally met a beautiful girl and he's going out with her, soaring on the wings of love. No, I haven't seen her in person yet, but my boy has been bringing me photos of them together on his phone. She's a goddess. She's got a good face. She's beautifully built. No wonder Kiran lost his head. I gave them the keys to my country house. My son and daughter-in-law didn't know about my third husband's inheritance. I kept a mansion in the suburbs for myself for a rainy day. But seeing how Kiran is in love with this lovely creature, I could not resist at the sight of imposed on him a stupid pregnancy wife. His eyes never burned. Aubins sat down on the grocery bags just down the hallway. Everything swam in front of Aubins' eyes, a ball of fire growing in her head, ready to burst into shards of pain. It's not true, her heart screamed. And her mind, unwilling to give in to her emotions, immediately began to toss in bits of strange inconsistencies, titillating them with the strangeness of her memories. Here she was walking Kiran to work, and suddenly she smelled the unfamiliar, tart odor of perfume from him. And here they are at the mall, and he declares to her that he is tired of walking in cheap socks from the collection of 10 years ago. He pulls her into an expensive men's clothing boutique, where they buy him stylish jeans. As recently as the day before yesterday, he returned from a late job and flatly refused to eat dinner. He explained that he was so hungry that on his way home he went to a cafe and ate there. He had never gone to a catering establishment without his wife before. They had been together all their lives since kindergarten and trusted each other so much that it had never even occurred to Aubins that her childhood friend, classmate, and husband could go out, get involved with someone, or have a mistress. Aubins suddenly froze. After all, citing fatigue, he had not shared a bed with her for over a month. Is it really true what her mother-in-law is now happily telling her girlfriend? People react to stress in different ways. Someone immediately rushes into battle to reclaim their position. Some people drown their sorrows with wine and sedatives. Aubins was neither one of those two types. She was leaving the lives of people who once meant a lot to her forever, without finding out anything, without proving anything to anyone. That's how it was after the story with the red-headed clown. It would be like that now. Aubins had never had much respect for Rose Arnoldovna. She had only courted her because of her warm regard for Kieran. Now she wondered feverishly, did she truly love her husband? Or had their love, born then in St. Petersburg on the basis of a strong friendship, always been a deception, an illusion, an attempt of two lonely hearts to find happiness? Now she somehow did not know the exact answer to this question. Kieran had always been there for her. They had always been inseparable since childhood. What is passion that burns everything in its path? Aubins probably didn't know. She still hadn't lost the ability to find excuses for her unexpected friend in every situation. Or perhaps that aged complex that she was utterly devoid of feminine appeal had risen to the surface again to plunge her into a new abyss of doubt. Now she would quickly find the keys to her grandmother's apartment in a drawer and go there to heal her mental wounds. In a month her parents would arrive from up north. She shouldn't say anything to them yet about her life changing so drastically. Kieran really was in love. He was in love. Taina was one of his clients. A first-year student, she was in a big city for the first time, where her parents had rented her an apartment. She couldn't figure out the latest model laptop on her own without her elders. Kieran, who had recently turned 21, seemed very big and mature compared to the 18-year-old fragile girl. He was about to defend his diploma, and here was a freshman. While he was dealing with her machine, she brewed him a wonderful coffee, made a mountain of delicious sandwiches, and all the while she was seen hovering around him like a light bird of paradise in her colorful kimono. His Oberon always walked like a cute, leering bear. Taina flew around the room gracefully, enchantingly. Impressed with his new client's appearance, Kieran asked to visit the next day to see if his lovely apprentice had mastered everything. Taina looked at him with wide-open, admiring eyes, the color of blue topazes, aquamarines and sapphires at the same time. Taina's parents are farmers, but they did not let their daughter close to the quiet farm, even though she lived in the countryside. In everyday life, except for potatoes or fried eggs, were not financially strapped. She ordered food in cafes or bought it on the way to the institute after classes. Taina was dressed with a needle, everything new, fashionable, stylish. She stood firmly on her feet. Farmers had already changed the furnishings in the rented apartment for her daughter, and every weekend they loaded a trunk full of natural products and brought them to the city. Her schooling was average. It was not the same thing to sit on the internet on social networks, to walk with friends and messengers, to communicate. She accepted Kieran's advances favorably. After a week they found themselves in the same bed, and then Taina showed him such aerobatics that he was confused. Such stunts with his wife he did not know. Taina was such a thing and obviously had a lot of experience. It was impossible to say that Kieran was not troubled by his conscience towards Oberon. He returned home late. A satisfied Rose Arnold had clearly been fed, sitting almost happily by the television, occasionally snacking on candy or tobacco smoke. Oberon herself was already asleep, having remembered to wrap up dinner for her husband so it wouldn't get cold. Kieran thought he was swearing to himself with his last words, promising himself to end it all at once. But as soon as he found himself in Taina's arms again, he forgot about everything in the world. Once, when Rose Arnold was in a particularly benign mood, he could not withstand the oppression of his radiant happiness and confessed to his mother that he was dying of love for a young girl. The woman, cynical to the core, asked him, "Is she even of legal age? Is this your new girlfriend? Make sure there's no trouble in that department. You've been asleep for a long time, haven't you?" Kieran nodded. Rose pointed a dainty finger in the direction of the bedroom. "What are you going to do with that redhead of yours?" "I'm more than satisfied with her care and attention. I'm enjoying myself. Even my injuries are hardly bothersome. You, my lovesick falcon, tell you what. You have many mutual acquaintances in our city. Even you with your mistress your wife did not tell you. I told you before my last official husband left me inherited a luxury country house. Arrange your dates only there, away from prying human eyes. Your girlfriend Taina will love it. You can be sure of it. And it's only an hour's drive from town. There's a woman looking after the house now. I'll arrange for her to stay on as au pair. And I'll keep Oberon with me for as long as possible. Do you understand me?" Rose Arnold was wildly delighted with the country estate. She was still a very young and unsophisticated woman. Such luxury only seen in the movies. The actress hid this cozy nest from strangers, and her friends, many years often under the pretext of departure on tour spent on the fazenda, as she called his country mansion, time with another hearty friend. Yes, even these temporary men did not admit that this expensive real estate belongs to her. Such a tidbit could turn any seemingly in love man into a real Alfonso, hunting for the treasures of an aging beauty. Aubins naturally had no idea of such an Alibaba cave of comfort either, nor had Kiran previously known of it. He and Tana were just out of town on that spring day when Abi had fled their home for a few breaths. Tana stretched sweetly and said to Kiran, "I have an unobvious suspicion that I'm pregnant. I've been getting nauseous in the mornings, and today I was freaked out by the smell of fried fish. Tomorrow I want to go to the drugstore to buy a test. If my hunch checks out, you're going to have a serious talk with your wife. You said you never loved her. It was just a true friendship. Well, tell that to your wife now." Hearing the suggestion that his incomparable mistress might be in an interesting position, Kiran soared to the heavens. "My baby, how happy I am. I won't wait for tomorrow, and today I will announce to my mother and Oberyn that I want to be only with you. Not a single tear will fall from the eyes of the mother of my future child. I will never make her heart race. I will never do anything to upset her." But at home, where Kiran returned from his date, elated by the news, everything went wrong at once. Rose Arnold sat among the soft cushions, her lips sour with resentment that she had been abandoned by everyone. A full vessel stood on the floor beside the carelessly abandoned bed. Mrs. Actress did not even think to try to carry it to the toilet, although during the day she quietly went to the restroom with a stick while no one sees. A wine glass stood lonely on the coffee table. Next to it was an ashtray full of cigarette butts. The woman was hungry and extremely irritated. Her first question was, is anyone in this house going to feed an old, sick, and very unhappy woman? Looking around the apartment, Kiran realized that Oberyn hadn't been home after work. There were bags of groceries standing orphaned in the hallway. When asked where she had gone, her mother replied that she never came home from work. To which Kiran argued forcefully that this was not true. Oberyn had come into the apartment, but where she had gone afterwards was the interesting part. Rose Arnold froze on the spot. She knew right away what was going on. Her sister-in-law overheard her talking to Kiran. She was so careless in some of the things she said out loud. "I didn't hear that Oberyn had run home. Well, whatever unforeseen circumstances caused her to leave again tonight to run errands. Let's wait. She'll be back soon," said Rose. Rose Arnold hoped to herself that her sister-in-law would come home soon. Where will she go without her and Kiran? That fat redhead, thought the actress, graciously allowing Kiran to make her a cup of tea, drink, and sandwiches. Then she dozed peacefully to the quiet sounds of voices on the television. She slept peacefully that night, unable to imagine that tomorrow morning her life would begin anew. Abi jumped out of the driveway so quickly that she didn't even realize at once that the weather had worsened. It was drizzling a nasty little rain, and the seemingly generous warmth of spring had suddenly disappeared. In addition, there was a penetrating wind that chilled me to the bone. The girl from the orphanage was still standing alone at the bus stop. The chances that she would get lucky again were vanishing before her eyes. "Why are you standing in the wind? You'll catch a cold and then lie in bed with a fever, won't you?" stopped the woman near the girl. "And who needs me? That with a fever, that without it," calmly answered her lilac lover. And from this point, be more specific, grabbed her by the hand, Oberyn, and dragged her behind her. "Let me in. How insistent are you?" The girl fought back weakly, trying to wrestle her already numb arm from Abi. "Everyone in our orphanage is abandoned. Everyone is abandoned. Everyone's parents don't want them. Why should strangers pay attention to us?" At first, Abi stopped like a dummy. Then she realized there was no food for the two of them at Granny's house. Her old things, whatever they had, would be there. It's enough to get by for a while, but money's tight. We have to go to the supermarket again. We'll figure out who's needed and who's not needed later. In the meantime, come and visit me. Don't worry, I won't hurt you," she grumbled. "What's your name? Woe is me." "I am Esmeralda," said the girl. "And I am 12 years old." 12? Abi looked at her puny figure doubtfully. "I wouldn't give you more than 8. It was the sickness that wore me out," she explained easily. That's what my mother used to say until she gave me up. A new tangle of questions began to form in Aubie's mind. It was a good thing they were already approaching the store. Otherwise, she felt the strength to digest her emotions begin to run out. In the warm room, they picked up everything they could fit in the cart. Pears were already $0.05 each, and Aubie kept stacking and stacking bags of fruit. Marmalade, large pineapple, oranges, grapes, bananas. Smoked sausage, some kind of uncomplicated cheese, milk, butter, sour cream flew indiscriminately next. They completed the still life in the cart: buns, pastries, fresh vegetables, pasta, and cereals. "Do you respect cheesecakes and semolina?" Oberon asked the girl with interest. "I am not capable of serious culinary feats. I'm already independent. I can cook anything: potatoes, eggs, sausages, or wieners," Esmeralda replied. But at home they sorted out their purchases, and Aubie was glad in her heart that she had kept the habit of not turning off the refrigerator. It came in handy now. They needed electricity. Dinner was a quick four-handed meal. At the table, Esme explained to Aubie what her words about the orphanage had meant. "America has many sick children with rare diseases. Treatment is most often beyond the means of their parents. But many dads and moms fight their little ones to the end. Not all of them. There is a layer that over time loses patience, does not see the prospects, tired, doesn't believe it can ever end. They come in and file a parental rights waiver for people like me. I've been treated pretty well. I could live many more years on specialized medication, but my mom wouldn't even inquire about the cost. She said, 'No, Esme, I can't stand to see you suffer any longer. All these procedures, endless injections. My heart bleeds. You're so thin, so pale. I'll leave you here at the boarding school, and I'll go home to the village.' The farm is unattended there. I had to give up chickens, cows, and goats. I'll show you at home. Mother bought a lot of treats that day. There were enough treats for all the wards. But she forgot to say that she had signed a waiver for me. Her daughter don't think badly of her. She's good, only weak in our therapeutic boarding school. Such cases are common." No one is surprised. Recently, Alex was abandoned. He's not used to it yet. We have a lot of lilacs around the building. The gardener's happy to see them. If we cut off the extra branches, it still has to be cut every year, and he doesn't have time to do it everywhere. "So Alex, he's my friend," said Esmeralda. "We've been around each other for a year now. He's got a sweet tooth. I sell lilacs at the bus stop. I climb out of the crawl space in the backyard, and then I bring him something good to keep him from crying." Did the needle in her knee or Esmeralda's words hurt Oberon? "Alex, he's my friend." The class in their kindergarten class came to mind. The first flight from the garages with Kieran by the hand. She shook her head. Looked at her watch. "Jesus, Esme, it's 8 o'clock. There's not enough time for you at boarding school." "Yeah, Alex, I've got to run already. We're right next door to you. 2 blocks away. Will you walk me out? You'll recognize our house by the bright blue fence and the sand-colored walls of the buildings outside. We have a temperature reading at 2100 hours. The babysitter won't let me go any earlier." The older boys are used to making do with their own entertainment after supper. Among the little ones, the heavier ones are more numerous. My peers are already all cured. I'm just beginning. After Seryoshka's abrupt departure, Oberon sat in a daze. How little we know about the world of those who hourly live with pain, calmly put his hand under the drip, has long been not afraid of injections, knowing that they will bring relief. She has repeatedly seen on TV how they announce the collection of money for the treatment of another seriously ill baby. Even a couple of times she has sent money in change to the specified account. We all feel that the trouble is somewhere out there, far away, not us, she said. Tomorrow I'll have to talk to their agency about holding a charity party for these kids, something to pamper the poor in their bleak existence. And she also thought about the fact that parents who abandoned a child alone with a disease are traitors. There is no forgiveness for them. Misunderstanding. Meanwhile, Kieran puzzled over where Oberon could have gone. There was no way his wife could have found out about his affair with Taina. He had no contacts of anyone with Oberon's new job, and in his speculation he decided to call Taina. "Kodak, have you decided to let me know that you've already talked to your wife about us?" His favorite Rose asked him at once. And what was her reaction? "She's as good as gone through the ground," Kieran answered her. "Oh, and where will your redhead go?" I'm sorry, she's not a beast at all. Who needs her? Rose pouted her lips. Tana, keep me posted. It's time for me to wash my hair. The girls will be in soon. A fellow student has the sniffles and we were going clubbing tonight, Kieran said. He blew his nose into his eye in the night and then pulled his jacket on. It was still raining outside, so he went looking for Aubins. Started, of course, at Aubins' parents' apartment. Maybe his wife had an urgent need to go there for some reason, and she was late with her business. A faint light was clearly visible behind the light curtain in the kitchen, despite this late hour. It took Kieran a couple of seconds to get to the third floor. At his call, Janie opened the door at once. Don't bother, Kieran, you're not going in the house. What's wrong? Aubins, you're not yourself. Kieran tried to insist on his husband's rights. Come on. I don't want to make a scene humiliating you and me to keep at least the good things that have bound us together for years. I accidentally found out about your love for another woman. Well, that happens. People drift apart in life. Let's do it in a civilized manner. Kieran, for the first time in his life, didn't know what to say to his wife, his battle buddy. You're 100% right. You can't argue. There is no such argument. The most reasonable thing I can think of is, do you want to stay in your parents' apartment? Then let's at least pack your things so you have everything you need. Aubins suddenly understood. The point in their relationship hadn't been set when she'd rushed out of Rose's apartment. Her husband had disowned her now, this very minute, burning bridges with his caring proposal, letting her know the Rubicon had been crossed. It was desperately painful, like when her appearance as a red-haired clown had been mocked. In fact, her appearance always made people cringe at first. But didn't Kieran know that Aubins was not the first beauty in their town? Her grandmother used to say, when you feel bad, Aubie, think of those who are much worse off than you are right now. The woman was immediately reminded of today's encounter with the sick girl. There was so much courage and a kind of cold-blooded calmness in that child that Aubins should have taken an example from her. She would pack up now and go to bed. Let the morning, which as rumor promises is wiser than the evening, make her look at everything with different eyes. 2 months had passed. In the intervening period, there had been global changes in the lives of Kieran and Aubins. The former had experienced the first disappointment of his life, and one that he could not recover from. There were several reasons for his lethargic apathy and complete indifference to everything. Rose's hypothesis that she was pregnant was not confirmed, and it was good that Kieran had not learned the whole truth in that legend. In fact, Tana, who had long been intimate with the opposite sex, had been taking birth control pills, clearly following the instructions for their use. The pregnancy pranks had been designed to test her young lover for lice. Tana had come close to not expecting such a violent, enthusiastic reaction from him. And when she learned that his wife had left him, she put forward the rest of the seductive resources. Only her maneuvers were unnecessary. She enthusiastically accepted Rose's absentee invitation to pay a visit to the unhappy, ailing actress. Once in the apartment, which hadn't seen Aubins in days and was in need of a fresh cleaning, Tana was instantly aware of the situation. It was springtime outside and the air was stale indoors. The young beauty, after listening to Rose's compliments, made a show of telling Kieran that she had toxicosis. She was still listed as a mommy-to-be at the time and went outside for a breath of clean air. Tana never returned to Rose's apartment or Kieran's life again. Aubins had calculated ahead of time what awaited her in her future possible marriage to Kieran. She didn't even want that posh country house as a wedding present. Aubins was sure that she could find a more interesting party for herself in this southern city. Youth and beauty would always be at a premium. Kieran had not expected such treachery from his beloved. No, he was ready to hire a nurse for his mother to take some of the household chores on himself, since Tana was soon to become a mother. But he couldn't tell her any of this. Tana had cut off contact with him once and for all. She blacklisted him wherever she could. She wouldn't open the door of her rented apartment. Stopped being friends with him on social media. The man was in shock. He'd given up everything for this love and was left with nothing. Kieran's mom couldn't keep a single caregiver around for more than 24 hours. She drove everyone crazy with her whims and kept demanding that Kieran reconcile with Tana immediately. The funny thing was that it didn't even occur to her that she was most to blame for the family's troubles. She encouraged her son's affair. She had hurt her daughter-in-law with bitter words. she never learned to appreciate human warmth and kindness. With her hair and clothes unkempt, she was more and more likely to have a glass of wine. She was now a pitiful sight. Her former regal beauty was long gone. No longer an elegant lady, but a proud old woman who still fancied herself a queen, but now without her loyal subjects and admirers. Kieran had the good sense not to bother Oberyn with vain requests to return. He wondered how his ex-wife managed to keep her mother's apartment in perfect order. Oberyn studied and worked. She'd gotten her diploma with honors. In her agency, she was known as an indispensable employee. Lately, she'd been seen several times in the company of Matthew, the electrician. Their friendship began unexpectedly with an unfortunate accident during a children's party. It was the hottest time of the year. Summer had just passed its second half. The thermometer was already afraid of heights, approaching the mark of plus 40 degrees Celsius. Split systems tiredly drove cool air in the hall for festive celebrations. On that July day, as the biggest joke, the clients had booked a themed party for their daughter based on Andersen's fairy tale, The Snow Queen. The highlight of the party was to be the outlandish ice cream cake still waiting in the freezer. After playing around pretending to be a cotton candy snowdrift, the evening's host, Oberyn, realized that something had gone wrong. The heel of her sandals had gotten stuck in an unknown gap in the wooden floor. For the third time, the children walked in a joyful round dance around Gerda and Kai, who had found each other. Next came the transition to the feasting room, where drinks and desserts awaited. Matthew, who had been watching the dress rehearsal before, assessed the situation in a flash. The ex-military man, who had excellent physical fitness, a real giant with hard, as if carved out of stone features, picked up Oberyn in his arms, deftly pulled her feet out of her sandals, and as if nothing had happened, brought and sat her at the table with the children to the applause of the audience. "Matthew, help me out," she smiled warmly at him. I was at a loss, I didn't know what to do. "It's a pleasure to carry such a wonderful woman in your arms." The usually unkind electrician mumbled, shook her hand in embarrassment, and then disappeared out the door. Oberyn would not be rusty. She's not a nun, after all. The next day, the whole staff was already enjoying buns baked according to grandmother's old recipe, and the redhead whispered in the electrician's ear, "I baked them for you, Matthew. But there were so many of them, I thought I'd treat everyone." Matthew and Oberyn often walked home together from work. One day, out of the blue, the woman shared her idea with him. "I'm friends with a girl from a children's treatment center. Oberyn is friends with an orphan girl whose mother gave up her parental rights. Oberyn finds out what documents she needs to gather to formalize the girl's guardianship. However, she was persistently advised that the girl would be better off with a full family, since Oberyn had just divorced her husband." "Already divorced," Oberyn explained. "Did I hear you were married?" Matthew wondered. "I'm not one to court a lady with a wedding ring. Would you take me on as daddy to your little friend?" "I'll think about it," Oberyn smiled slyly at him, looking a little like an oddly ginger-colored bear. "But I promise I won't be thinking for long." And she laughed out loud. At home that summer evening, Oberyn pulled a round box out of an old dresser. There was no exotic lady's charm hidden inside. Here lay a red-haired clown costume. Tomorrow, Oberyn was going to announce to the girl that she would soon have a new home with a foster mom and dad. Such news was a celebration for both of them. So it was decided to announce it to the girl not as Oberyn, but as Amelia the Red Clown. Let tomorrow in the children's ward of the orphanage will be a little brighter for everyone. Red-haired and desperate clowns, they are a bit of a magician. Just don't tell anyone about it, or people will torture them with requests for happiness. Happiness has to be earned. Otherwise, it's not real. Vivian decided to surprise her foreign fiancé and learned Italian, but accidentally overhearing his conversation. Before leaving the office, Vivian habitually looked at herself from head to toe in the large mirror by the door. Her blonde hair fell in waves over her exposed shoulders. The light dress beautifully outlined her slender figure. The length of her legs was emphasized by sandals on a low heel. The girl smiled at her reflection. Yes, she was completely satisfied with what she saw. She especially liked her own eyes, lately huge blue lakes, which now had a special light in them. They sparkled with joy, glowing with anticipation of happy changes. And love, of course. Yes, Vivian was in love for the first time in her 23 years. so much so that her heart jumped out of her chest at the mere thought of the person she loved. It turned out that all the romantic experiences that visited the girl before meeting him were not serious, even her feelings for Ben. "Yes, beautiful, beautiful, do not doubt it," smiled Vivian Amelie, a colleague about 15 years older than the girl. From the very beginning, she had taken care of the new young employee who had just graduated from university, taking her under her wing. Vivian was grateful to Amelie for that. "Thank you," she smiled radiantly at her colleague. "Where are you going after work?" "On a date with your Italian." No, Vivian shook her head. "You know, I decided to surprise him to learn Italian. It's the 10th lesson today, and I have to hurry. I decided not to tell him until later. He will be happy and surprised, of course." "That's right," said Amelie. "It is necessary to know the language. You never know." Vivian nodded, said goodbye to her colleague, and slipped out the door. A cab was waiting for her at the gate of the building. On the way to the language learning center, Vivian looked at the pictures on her phone. It was a long drive. The course was on the other side of the city. There was no place closer. English was taught in many places, but Italian only in this center. Apparently the language was not so popular, but it was easy enough to learn. Or maybe Vivian was so eager to speak the language of her beloved that she made rapid progress? Her teacher was very complimentary. Looking at the photos from last year's vacation in Rome, Vivian relived the pleasant moments over and over again. Here, against the background of St. Peter's Cathedral, she had no idea that a fateful meeting would soon await her. And here, not far from the Colosseum, Vivian had already fallen head over heels in love with the handsome Grace. He suddenly appeared in her life and immediately changed it, coloring it in 1,000 different colors, turning it into a kind of endless holiday. Energetic, lively, cheerful guy always infected Vivian with his positivity and good mood. And what compliments the temperamental Italian showered on the girl. They communicated in English. Vivian knew the language well, as she studied at a language school. Grace also knew it well, because she traveled a lot around the world and communicated with different people. The girl in general was incredibly open and sincere. She could find a common language with anyone. That trip to Italy was a gift from her parents. The girl graduated from the University of Economics with honors. Actually, economics never particularly attracted her. Vivian liked to take pictures. She got great pictures. She preferred portraits. Many noted that the girl managed to emphasize the inner beauty and uniqueness of people. "Yes, you are a real talent," more than once exclaimed Ben. The same Ben with whom Vivian was in love all her school years. But he only saw her as a friend. Between young people since childhood were warm, close relations, however, purely amicable. Girlfriends also praised Vivian in the photo and often asked to shoot them for social networks. "Nobody takes pictures of me as beautifully as you do, Trixie," a neighbor and part-time best friend declared. "There's no Photoshop required on these photos of you, because you're very beautiful yourself," Vivian smiled at her friend. "No," Trixie sighed. "I'm fat and I have a potato nose and small eyes. But in your pictures, yes, I'm beautiful. Too bad they're the only pictures. But you're really beautiful from every angle and in every light." Vivian knew it was true. Ever since she was a child, Vivian had heard people complimenting her on her looks. She was blonde with correct facial features and huge blue eyes, graceful, fragile, with translucent skin. Vivian herself would like her skin to be darker. But she did not even tan, no matter how much she used special creams. Friends and relatives chorused about the beauty and delicate appearance of her porcelain skin. So in the end, Vivian accepted her aristocratic pallor. Still, she had always liked swarthy people. They seemed bright, strong, incredibly attractive and beautiful. So after graduating from university, Vivian first went on a trip abroad without her parents. She was accompanied by the same faithful Trixie. She had long since earned money on her own after graduating from college and could afford to pay for the trip. It was an unforgettable vacation. The friends spent the first half of the day walking around the historical sites of Rome with a tour group, as part of which they came to Italy. And then they had their own time to get acquainted with the city. The girls visited everywhere. They saw all the sights, walked along the labyrinths of narrow, confusing streets, sat in restaurants and inspected showrooms. But the greatest pleasure for the friends was to spend time on the beach. The girls quickly realized how to get there. You take a train at the local station. Half an hour and you are already in a paradise place with white sandy beaches, where turquoise waves roll up on the shore. My friends usually settled down under a free umbrella, of which there were always plenty. They took turns going to the sea, one to look after things, the other to splash in the warm waves. At one of these moments, when Vivian was left guarding the beach bags, he approached her. Vivian had long ago realized that her appearance, blonde hair, pale skin, is attractive to Italians. They are swarthy, with black hair, dark eyes. Blonde, for them, a miracle of wonders. The girl constantly received compliments on her appearance, and not only from men. Vivian, in turn, was charmed by Italians so friendly, smiling, and very, very beautiful. Vivian already had a lot of pictures of smiling, swarthy faces in her phone. You could make an exhibition. They were all so interesting, sincere, and lively. But Grace was special, the most special. Almond-shaped black eyes, a beautiful tanned body, a cap of curly hair the color of a crow's wing. Bright orange bathing shorts emphasized the darker shade of his skin. His arms and chest were literally burning with muscle. The guy had clearly spent quite a bit of time at the gym, but he didn't look skewed, just athletic. He then crouched down in front of Vivian, who was taking a salty bath, and smiled broadly at her. His cheeks formed charming dimples, which finally conquered the girl. "Hello," he said in not-so-perfect English. "My name is Grace. And you? How do you like the beach?" "I'm Vivian." From excitement, the girl could hardly form a phrase in English, although she knew it well since childhood. What English? Even in Russian, Vivian would not immediately find an answer. Such a handsome man. And not just handsome, but Grace had a special energy about him. He seemed to mesmerize Vivian with his black eyes and his open smile. "Beautiful," the young man grinned. "If you think this beach is beautiful, you haven't seen real beauty." Vivian could argue that she could see the real beauty right in front of her. "I wish I could take a picture of this handsome guy. But it's kind of embarrassing to ask." Usually the girl didn't hesitate to ask such a question to people. Only now it was different. Her heart was pounding in her chest like frantic palms in the gym. At the same time, Vivian desperately hoped that her interlocutor did not notice her excitement. There's a deserted beach nearby, just next door, and only the locals know about it. There are no tourists there. And there, it's much better and more interesting, the guy told her, keeping his eyes on Vivian. In his gaze, the girl saw interest and admiration. Vivian knew, of course, that she had an attractive appearance. Others often looked at her that way. However, their gazes did not have such a hypnotic effect on the girl. It had never happened to her before. Vivian sat down on the towel. The boy, after asking permission, settled down next to her. From the realization that he cared for her, Vivian literally blossomed before her eyes. "This is so great. It's incredible," she exclaimed. "Why don't we go to that deserted and beautiful beach and go for a swim? You, me, and my friend. I've been watching you guys for a long time. I've noticed that you're not alone." Vivian tensed. The idea seemed both tempting and dangerous. After all, she didn't know this man at all. Although on an intuitive level, the girl already trusted her new acquaintance completely. Still, Vivian had always been distinguished by rationality. And she couldn't just go out with Grace like that. He noticed it and slapped his forehead with the palm of his hand. "I'm a fool. I didn't even think about what it looked like from the outside." "A stranger lures two girls into a deserted place," he said. "I'm sorry, I just lost my head at your beauty. Immediately I wanted to show you my favorite place, to share my impressions. My mom always says I talk first and think later. That's my trouble." Grace's remorse looked so comical that Vivian relaxed and smiled again. She wouldn't risk leaving the beach with a guy she didn't know, even if he was so handsome. But she didn't want to break up with him now either. If Grace left, they'd probably never see each other again. Rome is a big city. "Why? What if I invited you and your friend somewhere a little more crowded?" As if he'd read her mind, Grace suggested it. "For example, there's a disco in town tonight at my favorite bar. It'll be fun. Will you come?" Vivian immediately said yes. She'd definitely get Trixie to go to the event. She wouldn't even have to persuade her friend. She would be happy to spend the evening in a fun and interesting way. And then Trixie came to replace Vivian at her post. Seeing Grace, Vivian was a little embarrassed. Of course she was. Anyone would be confused by those beautiful black eyes. Trixie, always a little embarrassed by her fullness, stood half-turned toward Grace. She thought she looked slimmer that way. Vivian immediately realized that her friend was instinctively trying to present herself in the most favorable light. But after a couple minutes, Trixie's embarrassment was gone. Just like Vivian, she was mesmerized by the young man's every word and laughed at his witty jokes. The time flew by. The young people talked, becoming closer and clearer to each other. That day they laughed a lot, played beach volleyball, had fun on the beach. It was wonderful. Grace was polite, alert, and with Trixie. But both girls realized who was the real reason for his presence in this small company. Vivian melted with happiness as she caught Grace's admiring gaze. The sun was already sinking when they left for the hotel. "We must go," Vivian said regretfully. "I don't want to leave, but we have to get ready for tonight." "I'll be waiting for you," Grace smiled at them. "We won't be going away for long." "I don't know how to suggest it without scaring you. Why don't I give you a ride to the hotel? I have a car right here in the parking lot." The friends looked at each other. They both had the same thoughts in their heads. On the one hand, they didn't want to take the train and then spend half an hour in it. The girls were a little tired from the water and the sun, the abundance of impressions. And there was a party waiting for them, for which they had to prepare thoroughly. It was much better to spend some more time with the talkative, cheerful Grace. And I wanted to see his car. Grace seemed like a man you could trust. Except that if all intruders were like intruders, there would be no crime. The girlfriends had their doubts. Grace looked calmly at the girls, waiting for an answer. Vivian suddenly, without expecting it, blurted out, "Yes, give us a ride, please." "Thank you very much." It seemed to Vivian that if they refused now, Grace would be offended, and she didn't want to offend him at all. Trixie nodded with a smile, confirming her friend's words. Grace brightened. The parking lot was spacious yet packed. No wonder the weather was hot, and many people had flocked to the beach to enjoy the warm, gentle waves. Grace led the girls over to a beautiful sports car. Vivian and Trixie looked at it. They didn't know much about makes, but it was clearly not a cheap car. The sleek, dark green, streamlined, a little predatory and incredibly beautiful iron horse suited its owner very well. "Did you like my friend?" Grace smiled contentedly. "I've recently added to my collection. I love cars like this." Collection. Vivian suddenly looked at Grace with different eyes. There on the beach, he had seemed simple, natural, very close. But Grace must be very rich. He had a collection of automobiles. Vivian felt embarrassed again in his presence. Wealthy people are like representatives of another world. How to communicate with them, how to fit in. "Come on," Grace suddenly put his arm around Vivian in a reassuring way. His warmth and sincerity removed the awkwardness of the moment. The girls looked at each other and slipped into the cool cabin. The way he looked at you, Trixie shared her impressions in the room. She had already showered and was working on her hair, twisting it into tight curls. If someone looked at me like that, how happy I'd be. Am I exaggerating? Vivian argued. Now that Grace wasn't around, it seemed to her that she had made up his looks of admiration for herself, just because she wanted to. She'd gotten it into her head that this handsome man, who also happened to be rich, was looking at her in a special way. But in fact, Grace is just having fun, meeting cute tourists, having fun with them, just because he's sociable. And the blonde Vivian with her white skin and blue eyes is exotic for him. An interesting novelty, nothing more. No way, Trixie exclaimed. He's really fascinated by you. You could see it from the outside. Trixie's friend dispelled Vivian's doubts. I'm even a little jealous. Don't worry, Vivian said brightly. She was very encouraged by Trixie's words. We're looking for a handsome man for you tonight. Grace picked the girls up exactly at the appointed time. The friends got into his car without any fear. This time the guy was on another iron horse, a black Mercedes. I think this car is more suitable for the evening, he smiled, seeing the perplexity in the eyes of the girls. Mercedes is elegant and beautiful, just like you. Vivian's attention was not lost on Grace, who looked at her with admiring eyes. It was no wonder the girl had done her best. She was wearing her favorite tight little black dress, emphasizing the graceful lines of her figure. It suited the girl, and she knew it very well. Diplomatic Grace showered compliments on both friends, but Vivian felt that his heart belonged to her. The guy didn't hide it. It was a marvelous evening, delicious wine, fiery dancing, fun until morning. Grace introduced the girls to his friends. There wasn't much socializing going on. First, the music was so loud that it was impossible to hear the interlocutor. Secondly, the language barrier. Not all of Grace's friends knew English. Nevertheless, the friends had a lot of fun. At the end of the evening, Grace even dared to kiss Vivian. They were dancing, pressed against each other, among a crowd of similarly heated young people. And then that kiss. Vivian was dizzy with surprise and emotion. "I'm sorry, I couldn't help myself," he smiled, looking his companion in the eyes. "You are so beautiful. You have no idea how beautiful you are." After these words, Vivian kissed Grace. He embraced her. It seemed to both of them that they were alone on the dance floor, but in fact they were surrounded by hundreds of people. Grace and Vivian met every day since then. At first, Trixie accompanied the couple everywhere, but soon she refused to be the third extra. "I feel like I'm just in the way, like the fifth wheel on a cart," she admitted. "No, you can have your romantic rendezvous without me," Trixie admitted. Vivian didn't mind. Indeed, she felt freer and happier alone with Grace. They took many walks. Grace showed the girl the sights that are usually inaccessible to the eyes of a tourist. The real old Rome, ancient and striking. And they also visited the beach, to which Grace had called her friends at the beginning of their acquaintance. It turned out to be a really beautiful place, hidden from prying eyes by low rocks. A kind of paradise cove. Soft sand heated by the sun, huge boulders, gentle waves, and nobody, absolutely nobody around. This piece of land was a whole world that belonged only to Grace and Vivian. "I want to live here with you forever, and never go anywhere," Grace confessed more than once, hugging Vivian, and she felt the same way. The young people got to know each other better and better. Grace told about himself. It turned out that he was the son of rich parents. His family owned several wineries. "We have a lot of vineyards in the province." Grace shared details of his life. "I have been accustomed to labor since childhood. I know everything about wine production from the very basics. My father says that the man who will get our empire must be able not only to give orders." Grace had an apartment in Rome, and he'd come here for a vacation once in a while, like now. But the guy lived with his parents in the province, near the largest of the family factories and a huge vineyard in the family estate. Apparently, it was a huge house with a beautiful, spacious garden and even a stable on the territory. Grace loved horseback riding. Recently, the guy, like Vivian, graduated from university. Only the girl studied economics and the young man studied management. Grace loved to travel. He told Vivian a lot about his trips, where the guy has not only visited Europe, Asia, Africa. Grace saw Stalinist monasteries and ruins of Mayan temples, admired the Grand Canyon, and photographed against the backdrop of Niagara Falls. Vivian listened to him with her mouth open in amazement. Wow! They were almost the same age. Grace had indeed traveled extensively and had a wealth of life experience, having worked in the family business since his youth. His generosity and attention to Vivian pays off. He gives her expensive gifts, pays all the expenses during their dates. His gallantry and aristocratic manners impressed the girl. At the same time, the upcoming parting is very hard for both of them. Vivian is very attached to Grace. He has become for her a literally vital person just for this short time. Grace also clearly does not want to part with his favorite girl. However, he tries to reassure her, saying that this is not the end, but only the beginning of their relationship. Their fates are already intertwined, and they will not lose each other despite the physical separation. Gracie is soon to leave Rome as well. It is obvious that very deep feelings have developed between them in this short time. A difficult period of separation awaits them, but they hope to continue their relationship despite the distance and obstacles. The final scene at the night fountain is very touching and romantic. Work, business. I only stayed in LA. For you. It was my happiest 3 weeks. They were my happiest, too, Vivian said, holding back tears. I don't want to break up with you. We'll keep in touch. Social networks, messengers. I'll write to you every day, even every hour. If you don't mind, of course. Of course, I'm all for it, exclaimed the girl. But such communication, it's still not the same. I understand. I'll miss you too. I've never felt like this before. And as soon as business permits, I'll come and see you right away. I'll do that. I'm looking forward to it. Vivian left in tears. Grace drove her friends to the bus station, where a tourist bus was waiting for them. For a while, the guy accompanied them on his sports car, and then he left. All the way, Vivian looked at the photo of her lover. She took it on the eve of departure at the same fountain, where she couldn't stand it and cried in the arms of a young man. Grace smiled from the screen of the smartphone, but in his eyes read the sadness of the upcoming long parting. It was the photo that caught Vivian's eye now when she was browsing through the gallery section on her way to the language course. The girl smiled, remembering the touching moment. It seemed then that the separation would be eternal. Vivian had been afraid. Very afraid that Grace would quickly forget her. As they say, out of sight, out of mind. Vivian even shared her fears with the young man that last night and introduced him to a popular Russian, saying, "Well, I know another suitable phrase," said the boy, looking earnestly into Vivian's eyes. "Separation is like the wind, small passions are extinguished. But the big ones are only blown away. My feelings for you are so great that separation will only make them stronger and stronger. I miss you already." Grace kept his promise. He did write to Vivian often, sending cheerful messages, asking questions about her life, telling her about himself. Sometimes he sent her pictures of vineyards, sea, rocks. The lovers were constantly in touch. Surprisingly, Grace was right. Separation really strengthened their relationship. Young people recognized each other closer and closer. They became relatives, learned to feel each other at a distance. Grace periodically made surprises to his beloved. Hundreds of kilometers were not a hindrance for him. The guy often ordered the delivery of flowers and sweets. It was always unexpected and caused a smile and surprise to Vivian. She was pleased that Grace cared about her, trying to please her, even being so far away. On New Year's Eve, Grace gave her beloved a present. A courier delivered to her home an evening dress from a famous couturier. In it, Vivian went to the first corporate party in her life. There she made a real sensation. Men were lining up to dance with her. The lady did not refuse the cavaliers, but all attempts to continue the relationship stopped at the root. Her heart was no longer free. Vivian waited for Grace. He promised he'd come, so he would. The boy loves her so much. And Vivian was crazy about him. They're going to be together. Her parents knew about her daughter's relationship with a foreigner, but they didn't pay much attention to it. A holiday romance, Mom smiled. I know how dizzying they can be. I know it from hearsay, by the way. Just don't count on anything. Relationships like that are quick to start, but just as quick to forget. Trixie, too, thought there'd be no sequel to the torrid affair. Californians are just temperamental, unlike our guys. They know how to woo. Grace is cool, but I don't think he's really coming. If he did, he would have been here a long time ago. I mean, it's been almost a year. But Vivian didn't believe what her family said. She knew that Grace was just busy. He was helping his father run his business. And that's not easy. Grace would come to see Vivian if he promised. There was a lot going on in the girl's life at the time. After returning from a memorable trip, Vivian got her first job in her life. Thanks to her father's connections, she was hired by a local oil company as an economist. The salary turned out to be such that the girl aghast when she saw the size of the transfer for the first time. Wow. So now I'll be able to provide for myself. And with a lot of dignity, Vivian exclaimed. Well, we have a very grown-up girl, said on the day of the first paycheck at the family dinner Mom. Maybe it's time for you to move out and start living on your own. I think so, too, smiled the father, who looked proudly at his grown-up daughter, so beautiful, intelligent, and successful. A successful outcome of parental care and investment. Vivian clapped her hands with joy, just like a little girl. She had had her own apartment for a long time. Her father had bought it for her when she turned 18. "It's your future," he said then. The apartment was wonderful, spacious, bright, located in the center of the city. Vivian was afraid to imagine how much it cost. But then, as a student, she could not move into a new home. "You're not ready to live on your own yet," her mother said. "Let it stand for now. The apartment is not going anywhere. We'll renovate it slowly. And you study, you'll grow up. Then you will move in," nodded my father. And now, in the opinion of her parents, the daughter, who began to earn money herself, was quite ready to live separately. A new job, a new apartment, a new relationship, albeit at a distance. So many impressions, so many emotions. Life was booming, playing with bright colors. Vivian sometimes envied herself. All she needed to be happy was Grace by her side. Communication via video link was one thing, but the feeling of his warm hands on her shoulders was quite another. And recently he showed up at the doorstep of her new apartment. Grace had called the day before, unexpectedly, and warned him that he would send a courier in the morning with flowers and a small gift. When the bell rang, Vivian assumed it was a messenger. She opened the door and was stunned, unable to believe her eyes. On the threshold stood Grace. He was holding a bouquet of roses. The guy was smiling broadly. Vivian's legs even gave out. She gasped. Grace deftly took Vivian by the waist. They walked into the apartment arm in arm. She didn't go to work that day. She called her boss and took the day off. She couldn't leave Grace when he was finally around. That same morning, Grace proposed to Vivian. He didn't wait. "I want you to be my wife," he said, squeezing Vivian's wrist firmly but gently. "I realize that I cannot without you. This separation has not been easy for me. I thought of you every minute. I wanted to be near you all the time. I can't go on like this. Marry me. We'll go and live in my apartment in Rome, just you and me. Do you agree?" Vivian wrapped her arms around Grace's neck and kissed him instead of answering. Of course she agreed. Moreover, to hear such words from the lips of her beloved was her cherished dream, which was coming true right now. Her parents, having learned about their daughter's decision, of course, panicked at first. "How is it so? You will live in a foreign country, away from us. You never know. And what if they hurt you there?" Mom lamented. But after getting acquainted with Grace, my parents changed their opinion. The young man charmed them. They accepted the fact that the daughter will live in Italy with her beloved husband, and even rejoiced for her. And Grace generally liked everyone with whom Vivian introduced him. But you bet people are always attracted by sincerity, friendliness, sense of humor, energy. Grace had plenty of those. The only person who was not properly impressed by the handsome, wealthy Italian was Ben. Vivian frowned, remembering her childhood friend. He usually supported her in everything. How many times he had helped her out, protected her, comforted her. But this one was acting strangely. Trixie says it's jealousy. She says Ben's been in love with Vivian since he was a kid. That's why he won't accept Grace. But her friend is clearly mistaken. Vivian's been in love with Ben for a long time. What about him? He's only seen her as a friend from the beginning. When she was a teenager, she used to cry into her pillow at night because of it. What else could it be? She tried so hard to please her classmates, she chose outfits, did her makeup, tried to do her hair. And then she'd see him on the gymnasium in the arms of another girl. Was Ben the only one who found something in these girls? Vivian looked out the window of the cab as it passed the movie theater. How many times had she and Ben run here for horror movie screenings? Both loved such thrilling plots with unexpected turns of events. Vivian, of course, cowardly squeezed her eyes shut at the scary moments. Ben held her hand tightly, keeping his gaze on the screen. The girl hoped that someday in the darkness of the movie hall, her classmate would hug her. Maybe even kiss her, like his many girlfriends. But it never happened. "You're such a great friend," Ben said when Vivian let him copy his homework or help him with algebra. "You're so easy for me to talk to. Always accepting, always supportive. You're even better than the guys." Those were very dubious compliments for Vivian. She wanted Ben to see her not as a friend, but as her favorite girl. But it didn't work out. The childhood crush had faded. How many times can you knock on a closed door? But what remained were strong friendships. And Trixie? She doesn't get it. She got some other jealousy thing going on? Yeah, Ben's just teasing her, that's all. It's his usual way of talking to her. He called his friend's fiancée nothing but Angelica. Another convention. Too bad we don't know each other. I'd be texting her too, he said wryly. His name is Grace. What kind of name is that? I think it's feminine, masculine. It's actually Italian. Maybe your name sounds feminine to him too. It sounds like Andrea. Is that his cousin's sister's name? I don't care what he thinks it sounds like. He's Grace. That's all. Grace means angel, and Angel Ben is the one with the wings and the halo over his head. Thinking back on those joking exchanges, Vivian was smiling now. He's funny after all. Ben's sarcasm sometimes confused her, but Vivian was sure that if anything happened, he would come to her rescue. It would be a pity to part with him, friends and parents. But most importantly, Grace would be there for her, the man who made her heart beat so fast that it seemed to be about to jump out of her chest. Grace had been living with Vivian for almost 3 weeks now. Now he had the opportunity to leave the business for a while, but he had to return soon, and he intended to come home with his wife. The wedding was scheduled for the end of next month. It couldn't be sooner. All the nearest dates were taken. There were only a few weeks left. Preparations were in full swing at the mutual desire of the bride and groom. The wedding was to be a modest celebration in the circle of the closest people. True, the parents were a little disappointed. It turns out that they literally, from the birth of their little girl, dreamed of seeing their daughter in a bride's outfit and dance at her wedding to cheerful compositions. And here it is. And Grace's relatives aren't going to be there. As if the father cannot leave the business, and the mother, respectively, does not want to fly without her husband. Oh, that's okay. Then you'll get to know each other when you come to visit us, the daughter reassured her parents. We will show you Italy. Wonderful country. It's still strange somehow, not human, shook her head Mom. Even with the groom's relatives have not met once. But in the end, the parents accepted the decision of the newlyweds. The main thing that the daughter was happy. They saw the joy in Vivian's eyes when she was with Grace. Then so be it. The cab stopped at the porch of the Language Learning Center. Vivian paid the driver and went to class. Today was an interesting subject. Vivian was beginning to understand Italian speech, but only when people spoke slowly and clearly. And Grace, when communicating in his native language, spoke very fast. Basically, a lot of Italians talk like that. When the guy talked to his relatives or friends via video link, they answered him at the same pace, quickly and emotionally. Vivian could only make out individual words, and the meaning of the phrases eluded her. That was all right. Rome wasn't built at once either. She would learn. True, Vivian did not tell her fiancé about her lessons. She was preparing a surprise for the young man. He would be surprised when Vivian once addressed him in the purest Italian. The girl was fluent in English and French. Probably because of this, learning Italian was so fast. Vivian was far ahead of her classmates, so she was transferred to the next level ahead of schedule. And now she had almost mastered the next stage. Vivian wandered leisurely through the park, in her own thoughts. The wedding date was approaching. Grace was still staying with her. It was wonderful. While Vivian worked, he cleaned the rooms, cooked delicious Italian meals. Often he would greet his fiancée with a perfectly set table plates with the next culinary masterpiece, a bottle of luxury wine, even candles. Life with him resembled a magical, romantic, beautiful fairy tale. What would happen when they moved to Italy? Lately, however, Vivian, who was making progress in Italian, began to notice something strange. Grace was often talking to someone, with a man's voice coming out of the receiver. It sounded like the person he was talking to was unhappy about something. Vivian could make out individual words, as it was hard to hear. Debt's police crook Grace kept reassuring the man, assuring him that everything would be resolved soon. He did it in an exaggeratedly calm tone. Probably so that Vivian would not guess the trouble. Most likely her lover did not want to upset her. The guy didn't even suspect that his fiancée now understood Italian, so he thought that the girl did not know about anything. And Vivian? She still shared her concerns with Trixie. Vivian shrugged her shoulders. Who else to share it with? Her parents had only recently gotten used to the idea of their daughter marrying a foreigner and moving to another country for permanent residence. No, they cannot be worried unnecessarily. There remains a faithful friend, She always listens and supports. What's so strange? Trixie dismissed it. He's a businessman. A business is always some kind of problem that has to be dealt with as it comes. It's just business as usual for him. That's why he seems calm. I think this man is threatening him, calling him a crook and threatening the police. I wouldn't worry if I were you. Your Grace will handle it. He's an experienced businessman. You're working yourself up, and he's not even paying much attention to the person he's talking to. But if you're so worried about it, just talk to Grace, and it'll all work out, Trixie suggested. No, Vivian smiled. I don't want him to know I'm learning Italian yet. Let it be a surprise. You're a picture, Trixie grinned. How do you want it? Vivian wandered through the park where she loved to play with her friends as a child. Just next to the road, you cross it and the native yard, her parents' house. Today after work, Vivian decided to stop by her parents' house to pick up some documents. The upcoming meeting was a joy. The girl was quickly beginning to miss both her mom and dad. It was still unclear to her how she would be able to be without them for so long. You can't go to another country very often. Everything. So she would have to communicate through the laptop screen. By the way, Grace is as reverent as his fiancée is about her mother. He often calls her and talks to her via video link. Future mother-in-law Vivian is still a very young and spectacular woman. She has the same as her son's expressive eyes, black eyebrows, well-defined lips, and swarthy skin. And this woman's hair always looks like she just came out of a beauty parlor, dark, shiny, slightly curly. Yes, this lady is gorgeous. No wonder the wife of a successful businessman, owner of several wineries and hundreds of hectares of vineyards, must live up to her status. Vivian, too, would eventually become an elegant woman like her mother-in-law. Grace's mother smiled at Vivian from her laptop screen, spoke to her in Italian, and generally seemed friendly. Grace had said more than once that his mother was pleased with her son's choice. You are a wonderful girl, very beautiful, sweet, well-mannered, he passed on the words of his mother. And my mother also thinks that we will make wonderful children, her grandchildren, because we are very different in appearance. And such a mix of genes is always interesting. Vivian smiled then. At that time she was not as fluent in Italian as she is now. That's why she couldn't communicate with her future relative who didn't know English, but she was very anxious to do so. Grace's mother seemed to be a very pleasant and interesting conversationalist. They will surely find a common language. It was true that more often mother and son talked on the phone. Vivian heard sometimes fragments of their conversations, only Grace's lines because his mother spoke quietly. They seemed to be discussing plans for the future. At least Grace kept promising her that everything would be fixed very soon, and he would fix everything as soon as he got there. Apparently, the woman just missed her son very much. Vivian. Hello, a very familiar male voice sounded behind her. The girl turned around and couldn't hold back a smile. Ben was rushing towards her, spreading his arms for a friendly hug. How long it's been since we've seen each other. We used to spend so much time together. You look great. Ben praised Vivian with an attentive look. Despite the fact that she would soon be Grace's wife, Vivian felt butterflies in her stomach at the compliment. Her body must have reacted in the usual way. Vivian had been secretly in love with Ben for so long, and he had only seen her as a friend. Yeah, Ben was a great friend. And from the bullies Vivian protected, and with the boys teased her in a manly talk, and in the evenings met a neighbor at the bus stop when her father could not. Vivian was choreographing at the time. Rehearsals ended late, and the road from the bus stop to home in the dark seemed dangerous to the girl. But next to Ben, smiling, cheerful, reliable, she always felt like behind a stone wall. They were classmates from the 1st to the 11th grade, sometimes even sitting at the same desk, but they were usually quickly seated. Ben shamelessly cheated from the excellent Vivian, and she only encouraged it. Of course, such a thing could not pass the attention of teachers, so they covered it up. But Vivian managed to pass the cheat sheets to Ben, even when they were sitting at different ends of the class. Ben was very good-looking, tall, athletic, cheerful, with green eyes framed by thick lashes and hair the color of ripe wheat. He had the right facial features. Since he was a little boy, he had been a joker and the soul of the company. He played sports and guitar. He also read a lot, though more fiction and adventure novels. If he swallowed textbooks with the same zeal, he would be an excellent student. But the guy was attracted to other things: socializing, parties, hiking. Around him always hovered people's secret and frank admirers, buddies, friends. He was like a magnet for adventure and often became the hero of interesting stories. His life was like a soap opera. Vivian used to be desperately jealous when she saw Ben strolling along with his girlfriend. But he never noticed. He told her about his girlfriends. At first, he admiringly described the girl's virtues, and after a while he shared his disappointment and sadness. Vivian always listened to his friend and, if necessary, supported him with a word or gave valuable advice. "You understand me like no one else," Ben confessed more than once. "It's even strange, as if you could read my mind." "It's because we grew up together," she smiled back. "I guess that's why it's so easy with you. It feels so good." Vivian nodded in response. She felt exactly the same way, only she also wanted Ben to hug her, to kiss her, to hold her close. Only Vivian had never once even hinted to the guy about her feelings. Why not? Because she was afraid, I guess. Because what if confessing would push Ben away from her? And even if it didn't, it would make things awkward between them. It's not going to be as easy and pleasant as it was before. No, let it go on as it was. However, once Vivian was still close to opening up to a childhood friend. Then 18-year-old Ben, a second-year student at a local engineering school, suddenly decided to get married. The news came as a thunderbolt to Vivian. She still hoped that one day the guy would pay attention to her not only as a friend. It happens. But if Ben gets married, Vivian's dream will not come true. The guy's girlfriend was a classmate. Vivian often saw them together. She was a spectacular person, with a lush shape and bright red hair. Not like Vivian herself, thin, almost transparent, and pale as a moth. At that moment, the girl saw herself as unassuming and unattractive. At least Ben's future wife certainly outshone her with her brightness and temperament. Before the wedding, Ben walked around a little anxious. He tried to behave as before, joking, having fun, making jokes. But Vivian could see that her childhood friend had something wrong with him. "Why did you decide to get married so early?" One day she dared to ask a direct question. "I still have to study and study. I'll have to work here. What about university?" Vivian knew that Ben had dreamed of becoming a ship mechanic since childhood. That's why he went to engineering school. It took a lot of hard work, but he did it. And he was very proud of it. You see, then looked seriously at Vivian. Ben, she's expecting a baby, so there's not much of a way out. "Do you love her?" Vivian blurted out before she could think about what she was saying. "Yes, I do. Of course I love her," Ben said, a little uncertainly. How many tears Vivian had shed afterward, face buried in her pillow. Now she felt sorry not only for herself, who had lost her last hope of happiness with the man she loved. She felt sorry for Ben, too. She'd realized during that brief conversation that her friend was clearly unhappy, not by accident, because of circumstances. It had happened that way. Of course, Ben would marry the girl. He's always been honest and responsible, and then he'll spend the rest of his life suffering with a wife he doesn't love. Vivian sobbed over this life tragedy that could never be undone. But the wedding never took place. One day, Ben overheard the bride talking to another guy. In this dialogue, she admitted to that young man that the child is definitely his, swore, cited evidence, the timing of their dates. Her interlocutor clearly did not want to get married, so the lady had no other choice but to set up a date with Ben. You see, Ben shared the details of the story with Vivian. She told me over the phone that when she found out she was pregnant and I didn't want to get married, she decided to dump the baby on me. I didn't realize why she was so clingy to me at parties, even though she'd never noticed before. I was naive. After that night, she told me she was expecting a baby with me, and we need to formalize our relationship sooner rather than later. Of course, when Ben heard this dialogue, he demanded an explanation. His fiancée tried to make up something, somehow to get out of the situation. But Ben had already heard everything with his own ears. He then met with the child's real father to make sure, and he confirmed it. He also cursed Ben with a swear word and a naive young man. In the end, the man married his desperate girlfriend and recognized the baby, and Ben was spared having to live with someone he didn't love and learned a valuable lesson. So in the end, everything ended well for everyone. From then on, Ben became more careful. Now he was more careful about choosing girls and never made such mistakes again. Ben graduated from college and, as he had once dreamed, got a job on a ship as a mechanical engineer. Their town was located on the bank of a large, full-flowing river. Steamships and cargo ships traveled along it, so the demand for smart specialists was high. A river. It's great, of course, but I dream of big water. I wish I could go to the sea sometimes, Ben shared his thoughts with Vivian. But you have to move somewhere, don't you? Said the girl. Yes, you're right, Ben agreed. But it's for the best new places, new life. It's getting crowded here. Vivian felt uneasy at the thought of not having Ben around. She was so used to him. She could call Ben at any time of the day or night to ask for help and know that he would be there. Ben had proven his reliability time and time again. He'd picked up Vivian and her friends from the nightclub when suspicious guys were hitting on them that night. The girls were afraid, but Ben came to pick them up in his used car. He had just recently gotten his license at the time, and his father had bought him a practice car. And with the repair of the roof at his father's cottage, Vivian helped. His parents even jokingly called the neighbor boy their son-in-law. He didn't mind. And once there was a funny case, Vivian stayed the night alone. Her parents had gone to the village to visit relatives. It was summer, it was hot, and suddenly the girl noticed a huge spider on the wall. She'd never seen such a thing before. It was the size of her fist. Of course, the girl squealed loudly and then dialed Ben. He rushed over and spent an hour trying to catch the monster. Finally, the guy managed to cover the spider with a pelvis and shove it into a jar. Later, it turned out to be the pet of their upstairs neighbor. He kept rare insects in his terrarium, and this spider escaped during feeding, and on some passages got to Vivian's apartment. The girl was grateful to Ben for all these situations. To know that you have a person who is always ready to help, it is worth a lot. Of course, Vivian didn't want him to go anywhere out of town, although her childhood crush, as she thought, had already passed at that point. But a trusted friend is even better. Lovers quarrel and separate, but friendship is forever. And now they met by chance in the park and were very happy to see each other. "Are you going to your parents?" Ben asked. Yes, Vivian smiled at him. "I'm getting the papers together because the wedding is coming up. Then we're going to Italy right away." "Italy?" Ben grimaced. "You've thought this decision over so well, haven't you?" "Of course I have. Why are you reacting this way?" "Why don't we sit down on the bench and talk?" Ben suggested. Vivian nodded. She didn't mind. She always enjoyed spending time with a friend. "You see," the boy began, as they settled down on the bench under the lantern. "It's a shame about that one, Grace." "His name is Grace," Vivian corrected angrily. She didn't like it when Ben called her fiancé so disparagingly. "All right, Grace is kind of slippery, insincere. I've seen him a couple times, but I've noticed that he's going out of his way to make everyone like him, and everyone's falling for it." "Everyone but you?" "Yes, except me." Ben nodded his head. "Don't you think you're making a big mistake now? You're safe here. You have friends, parents, a job, an apartment. You're protected from every angle and out there. I can't protect you there." That last sentence struck a deep chord in Vivian's soul. Ben. He was so used to protecting her that he was afraid to let her go to a foreign country because he couldn't look after her. "I don't need protecting," Vivian smiled at him. "Grace and I love each other. We have a wonderful relationship. I saw Trixie the other day. She says your husband's having some business problems." "What a talker," Vivian said jokingly. "Yes, I was sharing my worries with her. Grace was discussing his problems with someone on the phone. Well, it's okay, he'll get over it. Businessmen have problems all the time. They happen all the time. I wish he'd solved his problems first, then gone to his fiancée." Ben shook his head. "A normal man would have done that." "You're acting like the strict older brother I never had," Vivian grinned. "But it feels good. If you'd gotten to know Grace better, you might have liked him." "I doubt it," Ben shook his head. "He's slippery. He's got something dirty on his mind. I'm a good judge of character. That's why I almost married that redhead who tricked you into getting pregnant." He reminded Vivian of an incident from his youth. She thought the boy was going to smile and say something funny, but he only shook his head seriously and said, "Well, you compare. I was almost a child then, an 18-year-old kid. I'm not that man anymore. I can see Grace is up to something. I don't want you to be his victim or a means to some end." "That's ridiculous. He loves me. That's what Trixie tells me. And that Italian looks at you with admiration. He anticipates your every wish and showering you with gifts. But you good and honest girls don't need much. You're easily fooled. But what do you think it would profit Grace to marry me?" Vivian put her hand on Ben's shoulder. A friendly, soothing gesture. "Money. A marriage of convenience. But that's silly. He's a rich man. I'm the daughter of middle-class parents. So what's the catch?" "Are you sure he's that rich? Did you ask him for his real estate documents? Did you even look at his passport? Did you see his income statement?" "What are you talking about?" "No, of course not. I didn't ask him any of that. It's obvious. He lived in Italy, he drove around in fancy cars, and he paid for us everywhere. He gave me expensive gifts and even paid for our wedding. A modest dinner at a restaurant. You don't need a lot of money for that. And your presents aren't that fancy." Trixie told me all about it with delight. Of course he had her fooled. But bouquets of flowers, candy, even a dress. It's not like your rich man's that broke. Even a student can afford that. Is that really the point? Vivian was getting angry. Why are you even picking on him? I'm sorry, Ben suddenly softened. It's just that I'm very, very afraid for you. You know, worried. Don't be. I'm going to be fine. I'm going to be great. I hope so. The conversation with Ben had thrown Vivian off balance. Until that dialogue, she'd thought she was doing the right thing. But her childhood friend had touched a note of doubt in her soul. Vivian herself was tormented by a vague premonition, something elusive. Grace behaved impeccably, still looked at the bride with admiration, still tried to please her in everything. He also showered her with compliments and spoke of their wonderful future together. But sometimes there was something in his gaze. Either discontent or contempt. The girl wrote it off as homesickness and concern about the affairs left so long in Italy. Probably Grace was worried about how things were going without him there. But nothing. Soon they will fly to Italy and live happily ever after. Just like in a fairy tale. It's a little scary, of course. Another country, another mentality. Everything is completely different. No friends around, no relatives. Ben's right about that. On the other hand, they will all come to visit her, and Vivian will gladly introduce them to a wonderful sunny country. Beautiful streets, gentle sea, smiling passers-by. Not at all like the streets of their hometown. Most importantly, she and Grace will be together. The feelings between them are so sincere and strong. Together they could handle anything. If Vivian had any doubts after her conversation with Ben, Grace, who greeted her with a wide smile and a warm embrace, immediately remedied the situation. He loves her. They will be happy together. That night, Vivian couldn't sleep. Grace was sitting in the other room, typing a message to someone on his laptop. It was a routine thing to read business emails, send replies. Big business requires constant involvement, the guy often repeated the phrase. Vivian liked that Grace seemed so easygoing, cheerful, and even a little joking. But at the same time, when it came to business, he was collected, responsible, serious. You couldn't go wrong with him. Grace, of course, is good in himself, with such a nice heaven and a coven. But Vivian wouldn't be living in a crib, more like a palace. A rich, handsome Italian is in love with her, and is ready to do anything for her. Vivian could not imagine such a thing even in her wildest fantasies. No, the girl always knew what young people like. This was evidenced by the numerous compliments and the corresponding looks of guys. Vivian, back in school, was often called for dates, and at the graduation she was constantly invited to dance. The girl was even tired and wanted to sit a little and take a break, only afraid to offend the cavaliers. But still, Grace is so handsome, so rich, and so smart. He needs a girl to match him. A Hollywood actress or a top model, no less. And he chose her, a simple girl. Pretty sure, but not a star or the daughter of wealthy parents. It's weird. Too much like a fairy tale. Trixie was jealous in a good way. and even asked Vivian to look around to see if there was a suitable suitor. Why? It would be wonderful to have a childhood friend suddenly at her side. Of course, Vivian would try to introduce Trixie to someone. Grace, it turns out, has a lot of brothers, even if they're not siblings. He's an only child himself. Trixie's cute, even though she's self-conscious about her supposed fullness. Isn't she a bride? And what wonderful photos Vivian will take in Italy. She already has a page on the internet where she posts her work and praises it. Even asks to sell some pictures. They are really beautiful. Vivian knows how to notice interesting and unusual things. But Italy is a completely different nature in architecture. Exotic, colorful. Vivian already anticipated the future excitement on her page. She will definitely familiarize her compatriots with this unique country through photos. Let them admire it too. Maybe she will even realize her dream. As the wife of a wealthy man, Vivian will probably be able not to work. Why should she? If Grace is going to provide for her family, and what would she do? Her degree in economics is unlikely to be valid in a foreign country. Different laws, different accounting rules. But the girl will be able to do her favorite thing. She'll take pictures. Who knows, maybe in the future it will bring her not only pleasure, but also money. And if not, it's okay. Now you don't have to worry about finances. Grace is incredibly rich. It's a very nice addition to the man you love. And then the phone rang. Grace. Someone was on the video conference. Vivian was all ears. No, she wasn't the type to eavesdrop on conversations out of curiosity. She just wanted to check herself to see how far she'd gotten in her Italian. Matthew, one of Grace's cousins, was on the line. First, the boys greeted each other, exchanged news, and in this short dialogue, to her satisfaction, Vivian understood every word clearly. But then the conversation took a strange turn. The girl understood everything, but she forgot to think about her success in Italian. The content of the dialogue was too suspicious and disturbing. "Well, are you going to get the money soon?" Matthew questioned. "And you think this kind of thing is quick?" Grace's voice sounded annoyed. "The wedding, the moving. Then there's still time to get it ready. So why don't we start preparing now? What's the holdup?" "No, you can't scare her off. You don't know anything about these things." Vivian froze on her bed. What was that now? Was it really about her? What should she be prepared for? What would scare her off? Somehow this all sounded very unpleasant. And then I remembered what Ben had said about Grace being slippery. He did seem that way now. "Are you sure your plan will work?" Matthew clarified with a clear threat in his voice. "I'm sure it's almost done. Just the finishing touches are left." "Well, watch this, or you know you're in debt. And if you can't pay it back in money, we'll take it another way." "It won't come to that." Grace tried to speak in a steady voice, but it was clear that he was in anxiety. With that, the brothers said their goodbyes and Grace went on with his letters. And Vivian? Of course she could not sleep now and kept going over the details of the strange conversation. And she liked that conversation less and less. This Matthew, whom Grace called brother. He'd spoken to Vivian's fiancé in a dismissive manner, not unlike a cousin and business partner. Matthew was threatening Grace, and the latter was talking about some plans, money, and debts. Vivian's first impulse was to approach her fiancé and ask him directly about everything, but the girl held back. That was not the way to do it. If Grace is really deceiving her, he will come up with something convincing this time. If the groom was honest, Vivian's suspicions might offend him. It's not nice to know your significant other doesn't trust you. No, that's not what Vivian will do. Now she will simply become more attentive, will listen, look closely, notice some important details. Eventually, the girl will find out the truth. For the next few days, nothing unusual happened. Grace was as charming as ever. Vivian even relaxed a little, forgot about the accidentally overheard conversation. The groom had a hypnotic effect on her. His gaze, his warm embrace, and his words that seemed to be able to pacify, to make her feel happy. With no one else had Vivian experienced such feelings. Vivian had not experienced such feelings before. And yet, when Grace once again called her mother from Italy via video call, Vivian turned to listen. She was in the kitchen at the time, Grace in the living room. The girl was washing dishes. The water was running noisily in the room. That was probably why Grace was convinced that the bride had not heard the bell. But Vivian, After her fiancé's strange conversation, did not blame herself for her excessive curiosity. The girl went to the door of the parlor and listened. She needed to know everything, absolutely everything about the man with whom she was going to tie her fate. Grace seemed to be hiding something. Perhaps his conversation with his mother would resolve this doubt. Vivian already realized that her fiancé was not as sincere and honest as he tried to seem, but she was not ready to hear such a thing. Grace's conversation with her mother turned out to be quite frank. He opened the girl's eyes to the situation in which she found herself. "Hello, son," the woman said affably, looking up from the screen at her son. "Hi, Miss You and little Lulu," Vivian smiled. She knew that Italians had a very strong attachment to their mothers, and thought that was a rather lovely fact. Here now, the grown-up Grace had unashamedly confessed to his mother that he missed her and his little sister. "I wish you'd come back already." "So is the wedding coming up soon?" "In a week." "It's not much longer. Then we'll go straight home. We'll almost have to pack." "Does she know yet?" "No, it's too early to tell her. When we get to Italy, her relatives and acquaintances won't be around. It's a very different situation. I shall have much more influence over her there." Vivian froze. There she was again. They're talking of some dangerous plans for her, intrigues. What was going on at all? Vivian suddenly realized she didn't want to go to Italy, and Grace could hardly be trusted. "You're so smart," the woman on the other side of the screen said with pride in her voice. "Your father was the same way, but you're even smarter. You've had a lot of wisdom since you were a child. Does this poor girl really believe that you are in love with her? You're so handsome and she thinks you're rich." "Poor thing" is the most hurtful expression for Vivian's blonde, this woman, future mother-in-law. She smiled so affectionately in her face and called her beautiful, while she herself is like an evil stepmother from a typical fairy tale. "You know I know how to be gallant when necessary. We will take into account," she said. She just lost her head over me, and it's so easy. A very simple task. She's as naive as a child. Well, all the better. "You bet. Back in Italy, when I took her and that friend of hers for a ride in the rental car, I negligently forgot to remove the rental tag from the passenger seat, and she didn't notice. She believed I owned an expensive sports car. She was so surprised. You should have seen her at that moment." "There's nothing to be surprised about. She doesn't understand Italian, so she didn't realize it. By the way, are you sure your fiancé doesn't know the language?" "They don't. She can only translate a few words of Italian, that's all. She's not very bright at all. Lucky for us. Maybe we shouldn't be so frank in front of her." "Don't worry. First of all, we're talking fast, so she won't get the point. And second of all, she's in the kitchen right now doing the dishes. The water's running. That fool doesn't even know I'm talking to you." "That's good, my boy, because I have a lot of questions for you." "What kind of questions?" "I think we've talked about this a bunch of times. But let's go over the basics again. How are you going to tell the girl that you're going to live in a tiny apartment in Rome instead of going to our non-existent estate with huge vineyards? That's nonsense. I'll say that I have business in the capital and will stay in my studio apartment here for the time being. I've already rented it for a few weeks. Oh, it's costing me a lot of money. At first I let the dust in my eyes, rented cars, took them to clubs in Italy, gave them gifts. Now I live in her apartment. I saved money, like a hotel, but I have to buy groceries and cook dinners for her to maintain influence on her. Now I've got this rented apartment in Rome. It's okay. If it works out, you'll cover all your expenses and pay off some of your debts, Grace said. Yeah, the most urgent debts have to be paid off soon. Ultimo is harassing me, threatening me. He doesn't want to wait any longer. I told you not to mess with him, the woman said with concern in her voice. I thought I'd make good money with him. But that's how it turned out. Now I got to make it work. First of all, you'll pay off the motel debt, and then you'll take care of the bank loans. See if we can get out of this debt hole of ours. I'm sorry I can't help you. Come on, Mom, you're always so supportive, aren't you? Vivian stood at the door. She'd already realized that Grace had lied to her. Lied to her from the start. He wasn't a businessman, he was in debt. And Ben wasn't his cousin at all. Grace owed money to dangerous people. He's been pushed to the wall, and the charming Italian is desperately looking for a way out. The fancy cars aren't his. They were rented. The apartment where the newlyweds planned to go after the wedding was also rented, although Grace claimed he'd recently bought it with money he'd earned. Vivian had noticed the pride and fire in his eyes. It was horribly disgusting. It's also frightening, disturbing. It was not clear what part she, Vivian, played in this scheme. What was she to do with it? Mother and son continued their conversation in full confidence that no one would hear them, and if they did, they would not understand. "Your fiancée, doesn't she know anything?" Grace asked. "No, why should she?" She grinned. "She's in love with me, like Juliet with Romeo. She looks at me with loving eyes and agrees with every word I say, so it won't be hard to convince her to sell the apartment, especially once we're in Italy, away from her family. And I'll give the money to Ben, and Ultimo will finally be off my back." Vivian felt as if she'd been hit over the head with a bag. That's it. Turns out Grace was in on the whole thing because of her real estate. Yeah, her parents bought her an expensive apartment in an upscale neighborhood. You can get a lot of money for that, and she needs the money, Grace. That's what her plan is. A young, charming con artist has run up debts. She's being threatened. She needs to pay the money back fast. So the bastard comes up with a brilliant plan, except it's not going to work. What luck that Vivian once decided to go to these language courses. A chill suddenly ran down her spine. She was scared. She is alone with a person who is probably a criminal. At the very least, she definitely had some dealings with Ben, and the latter is a real criminal by the looks of it. Grace is a scary person. I don't know what she's capable of. And Vivian is alone here, all alone. She took her cell phone out of her sweatshirt pocket and, without leaving her observation post, began to write messages. To whom? She texted Eden, of course, out of habit. He was always there for her in difficult situations. And now, his presence and support would be of great help now. Vivian did not leave the door of the parlor. The conversation was not yet over. What if she found out something else interesting? She did. Grace and her son went on to discuss how they'd gotten to Vivian in the first place. It turned out that the criminal couple made their money by seducing rich female tourists of all ages, staying in their rooms overnight, and then disappearing in the morning with jewelry and cash. As a rule, the women were embarrassed to go to the police. Of course, who would want to admit they'd been duped? A young swindler charmed you, complimented you, then cleaned you out and ran away. Ladies in that situation don't look so good, to put it bluntly. Yeah, even if the victims had gone to the authorities, Grace was virtually impossible to find. He chose a different part of town each time. Each time, he'd change his appearance a little bit and use an assumed name. And of course, the guy would find out where the cameras were in the hotel beforehand and try to stay out of sight. It was a win-win. Except it didn't make much money. Grace had debts, lots of debts. First, bank loans. The guy loved the high life, vacations, expensive cars, brand name clothes. He shamelessly took loans, which then, of course, had nothing to repay, because Grace did not work. He had no education, no desire to work for anyone. That's why Grace got involved with Ben one day. It seemed to the guy that it was a great opportunity to easily and quickly earn a decent sum. But something went wrong. Grace ended up owing dangerous people. They kept calling him, threatening him. The debt increased every day, which drove Grace to despair. He realized that if he couldn't find the money, he might not be spared. Vivian learned all this while standing in front of her own living room door. And then Grace's mother, who was well aware of her son's means of earning money, proposed a wonderful plan to her offspring. And from the conversation between son and mother, Vivian realized that the woman has great power over the guy. He is ready to do anything to please her. The lady didn't work. She kind of took care of the house and her young daughter. They were occasionally kept together by a man, another suitor for Grace's spectacular mother. But these were unstable sources of income that quickly dried up. The main earner remained Grace with his petty scams against rich tourists. It was the mother who encouraged the handsome son to make money this way. Realizing what was going on, Vivian felt something like pity for Grace for a while. It's a terrible thing to be used like that by your own mother. Vivian's unfulfilled mother-in-law decided that in the current situation, the cash and jewelry of rich ladies would not be enough to cover her debts. So she came up with a new, much more risky and complicated way of making money. If it worked out, Grace would have the money to pay off Ben. Grace's mother targeted Vivian herself. She found out through her channels that there were 2 young Russian tourists staying at the hotel and ran a background check on them. Of course, not only Vivian was in the field of vision of the clever ladies, but she turned out to be the most suitable candidate for several reasons. The first and most important, the presence of her own living space, an apartment in the center of her hometown, registered on the girl. Yes, Grace's mother had access to that information. I had to pay a small sum for the database, but the benefit of owning valuable information many times exceeded the cost of the purchase. Secondly, Vivian herself was the perfect victim. Young, inexperienced, gullible. First Grace's mother, and then he himself had watched the girl for days before acting. Hearing this, Vivian shuddered. She was being watched. She was so happy and enthusiastic she didn't even notice anything. Vivian was lucky that mother and son decided to discuss this whole story in great detail and talked about plans and even remembered the past. Now the girl was aware of everything. Further, the conversation between Grace and his mother turned to everyday topics. The weather, the health of some common relatives, the mischief of the groom's little sister Vivian. They made no further mention of their victim, but Vivian already knew all she needed to know. The girl returned to the kitchen and sank powerlessly into a padded chair. Her rose-colored glasses had just shattered with a crash and clink, and as it always happens, with the glasses inward, she was in pain. Unbearably hurt that the beautiful fairy tale and unearthly love had all turned out to be just a deception. And Grace wasn't the perfect prince on a white horse, but a con man. He has no feelings for Vivian, only pure calculation. According to Grace and his mother's plan, Vivian was to be the wife of the con man. Together they would go to another country, live in a rented apartment, which Vivian would consider Grace's property for the time being. Then the young husband would ask her to sell the apartment, and Vivian would agree. Of course she would. Grace would surely think of some plausible excuse. He'd been working her over so skillfully all this time that there was no doubt Vivian would sell the apartment and give him the money. And then the divorce. And Vivian would be alone in a foreign country with no money and no support. Of course, her parents would not abandon her in a difficult situation, would send money for a ticket, and the girl would return to her native country, where she would no longer have her own apartment. Even to imagine such an outcome is scary. In Grace, he would have gotten away with it, because legally he did nothing wrong. Vivian would have sold the apartment herself and handled the money herself, giving it to her spouse as she saw fit. There is no crime. It doesn't seem to exist in this situation. What kind of cunning plan? But Vivian did figure it out. She decided to wait until Ben arrived, to whom she'd written a couple of messages. Until then, she would do nothing. Who knew how Grace would behave when she realized that his plan had failed? I mean, this was a long-term project for the con man. The guy invested a lot of time, effort, and money to impress Vivian and create the image of a rich groom. The con man had to go to a lot of expense. Oh, he's going to be pissed. It would be better if Vivian wasn't alone at the moment of exposure. But the girl did not hold back. After speaking to her mother, Grace entered the kitchen with a fond smile on her lips. Now she seemed to Vivian unpleasant and insincere. But only half an hour ago she had been admiring the dimples on her lover's cheeks, which appear when he smiles, admiring and feeling happy and loved. "Shall I help you, my love?" Grace asked, pushing Vivian away from the sink where she was washing plates. "I'm getting used to the royal life. In my house you won't be doing kitchen duties, dishes, washing, or laundry." Here Vivian couldn't take it anymore. Restrained anger, despair, and frustration burst forth in a mighty torrent. "Of course I won't be a maid in your house," exclaimed the girl. "I shall never be in your house at all, because you have no house at all." Grace, perhaps for the first time since the day of their acquaintance, looked confused. The boy flapped his long eyelashes and shook his head. "I know everything," Vivian repeated calmly, looking into Grace's eyes. She was triumphant at this moment. He thought she was a naive simpleton, an easy victim, trying to take advantage of the inexperience of a girl in love. Well, you got the wrong girl. Vivian isn't that simple. "How did you know that?" Grace seemed to realize there was no point in denying it. "You spoke too frankly to your mother," in the purest Italian Vivian blurted out. Grace's eyes widened in surprise. Yes, as the girl had once planned, she had impressed him with her knowledge of Italian. Just not in the situation in which it was supposed to happen. Grace was angry. The girl noticed it at once. A bad glint appeared in his eyes. His hands clenched into fists so white his knuckles turned white. Vivian tensed. She was afraid. She suddenly realized that she had been wrong to snap, wrong to change her decision to hold on until Ben arrived. But Vivian didn't show her fear. "Get out of my apartment," she sternly ordered her estranged husband. "Right now I'll pack your things and leave them on the doorstep, and then leave immediately, or I'll call the police." "I will," Grace whispered, slowly approaching Vivian. She instinctively retreated to the windowsill. Like a frightened bird, she wondered what he could do to her in her condition. He was obviously up to something evil. "I'll leave, but I'll pay my expenses first. The money I spent on you. That's fair, isn't it? Give me your jewelry, your money. Your money. What else you got? I'll leave." That's how Grace's veneer of sincerity and benevolence came off. Now Vivian was faced with a greedy and unpleasant man, a fraud, a cheat, a deceiver who might even be capable of physically harming her. How frightful. "I don't have any jewelry," she whispered. Her fervor had worn off. Now she felt only horror in the face of the all-consuming danger that would rob her of her will and paralyze her. Grace rushed into the rooms, smashing and breaking everything in his path. Vivian could hear him slamming closet doors, searching for something to sell. The boy was desperate. In such a state, a man, especially a man like Grace, could do anything. Vivian tried to leave the apartment, but Grace pushed her away from the door and shouted at her so much that she immediately realized that the next time she went out like that could have serious consequences. Vivian sat in the kitchen with her arms around her head, listening to Grace ransacking her apartment. And then Ben showed up. Vivian had always been excited to see her friend. But now it was something special. The girl felt like a mountain had been lifted off her shoulders. Ben quickly assessed the situation. When he noticed Vivian huddled in the corner of the kitchen, he became furious. Cussing and fighting sounds came to the girl's ears. "Get out here." Ben literally threw Grace out of the apartment and then dialed the police. He spoke loudly and clearly so that Grace, who kept banging on the closed door, could make out every word. Then Ben rushed to Vivian, put his arms around her. The girl clung to him. She was shivering. Tears were streaming down her cheeks. So many events, so many emotions. Ben stroked her back, her hair, her shoulders, said something soothing and affectionate, nodding his words, not asking unnecessary questions. Realized that the girl was in the wrong state of mind right now. A few months passed. Grace returned to Italy. The police did not start a case of a con man on him. Lucky him. On his hand played the fact that he and Vivian had time to apply to the registry office, that is, considered a bride and groom. So the guy wasn't prosecuted for breaking into someone else's home. After all, the landlady was not a stranger to him. The whole situation looked like a personal quarrel, a misunderstanding between spouses, a domestic dispute. And Vivian had no proof that Grace was a con man and a con artist. The Italian left America a pauper. Vivian didn't know how he'd gotten over his failure. She didn't really care, by and large. Vivian posted her story on every travel forum she could find. She detailed how she had fallen for the scammer and even posted pictures of Grace. Perhaps it would help at least someone to avoid meeting the scoundrel. Vivian was not long worried, thwarted wedding. For it wasn't long before she received another proposal. This time from Ben. Then, that terrible evening, sitting on the kitchen floor, the young people frankly talked. It turned out that Ben had been in love with Vivian since childhood and therefore was very jealous of her overseas fiancé. And then when he met Grace in person, he was the only one of the company who was not affected by the foreigner's charms. "I mean, you were in love with me?" Vivian stared at the boy. The surprise that followed this confession, for the time being, even overshadowed the emotion of Grace's disclosure. "I was your secret admirer, and you thought of me only as a girlfriend." "You've said that many times yourself," Ben smiled. "All I had to do was watch your many affairs from the sidelines and wish desperately that I could be one of those guys someday." "What fools we were," Vivian laughed. "Thanks to that Grace of yours. He really is an angel, isn't he? It's thanks to him that we've finally gotten it all straightened out. I've had a crush on you since first grade. But I didn't think I'd be attracted to you as a guy. That's why I became your friend. So I could at least be there for you, keep you safe. Anyway, Vivian was getting ready to get married again, only with a completely different man. This time she had no doubts or worries. Everything was going right now.